want to thank our sponsor, Andersen Windows. Andersen's Easy Connect joining system delivers the ultimate in job site conveniences, making it easier to install the large combinations homeowners desire while also reducing job site resources needed.
In fact, most contractors surveyed said they could reduce the number of installers by 50% using the Andersen Easy Connect joining system.
And this patented system utilizes interlocking fiberglass joining plates to give you design flexibility without compromising performance. See the difference for yourself by visiting andersenwindows.com.
The Easy Connect joining system is available with the A series and also the 100 series windows if you guys are interested.
And that is Andersen with a S-E-N at the end. This podcast is also brought to you by Buildertrend, a more efficient team, instant problem solving, and clients who feel engaged and will rave about you to anyone who will listen.
Strong communication is key to any successful construction project.
But accomplishing that is easier said than done because staying connected is harder than ever for busy, hardworking construction teams. There are so many distractions in a construction business owner's daily work. It's hard enough to know what you're up to, let alone what your team members are up to.
Buildertrend changes all that. You'll get the constant calls, texts, and emails under control, as all communication for any project can happen. Client and subs have their own portals to see what's happening 24/7, and your team is free from admin work and better able to make decisions faster with all the details right at their fingertips.
So if you're ready to make your team a collaboration powerhouse, learn more about it at buildertrend.com/MC communication.
You want to be a collaboration powerhouse?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, man.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's see the muscles.
So we're live. We're on YouTube live. If you guys aren't joining us already, make sure you head over to YouTube every Tuesday and you can join in on the conversation. This week, we got Mark Williams, the Curious Builder, on the podcast.
Accounted and present for.
you look way more professional. I said to Doug the other day, I was like, why didn't we think of a green screen? He goes, I thought of that. I'm like, meanwhile, like Tyler's got the sick black background. I still have my messy office.
I mean, I think with NS Builders, I'm really surprised you're not completely blacked out except for like your eyeballs.
You know what?
I was going to joke with you. It just comes back to me now because with all your black.
black on black.
It looks so good. I mean, but I think NS Builders should really be like Navy SEALs. I mean, and after your training with Jocko, I feel like, you could really embody the all black.
So true story. Like, so Jocko, when I was at that event, he talked about, because there wasn't a dress code for a lot of his guys, but they collectively, like as a platoon, decided to have a dress code. And a bunch of the guys like fought it and they were like, nope, Jocko, this is stupid. And he was like, listen, how sick would it be? And I'm like paraphrasing, but he's like, think of stormtroopers. Everyone comes out wearing the same fucking thing. Everyone looks like everyone's got the same jacket, same pants, same haircut. How badass would that be? And everyone's like, yeah, that actually does sound pretty badass. And I came home and I ordered like everyone the same shirt, all the same jackets. And and I've always felt that way. I just always struggled to. The hardest part about buying workwear for my team is that everyone has different taste. So like I buy a jacket and then like 7 people are like, yeah, I won't wear it. I don't like the way it fits. So Julian, my operations manager, he was like,
ungrateful.
I wasn't going to say it. But Julian decided to just like, he ordered, I showed up to my office one day and there was 40 samples here. And he just had the guys test them and found like 2 North Face jackets that the guys liked and ended up buying them. But I will say that, now everyone wears them on the job site. And I tour a lot of people on our job sites, like architects and stuff. And my whole team was there one day and the architect walks up and everyone came out of the house to introduce himself and everyone had the same thing on. And every single time, an architect sees it, they always comment on it. Like, wow, like you guys are super professional. You guys all have the same clothes on. The branding looks the same. That's awesome. And I'm like, this makes a big difference.
There's no end to branding. I love marketing. I love branding. The problem is my pocket, or I don't have pockets in these jeans because there's no money there. And
Yeah.
I was curious for you is like, yeah, I don't self-perform, so I don't really have that many employees or any on
Mm.
site that are self-performing. Are you only outfitting your own internal team, or are you also outfitting your trade partners and subcontractors with your apparel?
No, just my
Soon,
own,
soon.
just just my own team. I did think about that, and I got shut down pretty quickly. And I'll tell you, Ferris Rafuli, who I think I've referenced before, but he was he designed Drake's house, and he's this like bougie designer. But when you watch his videos or see his construction sites, everyone has a Ferris Rafuli vest on, like a work vest that's branded with his name on it. And I had thrown it out to one of my guys, and they were like, "No, like, dude,
It's fun.
no one's gonna wear that."
I used to.
And
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just like, it's just my team. I would love that. I would love for everyone on the job site to wear the same thing. Um, Maybe I will at some day.
I
And they don't have to wear my brand, just like everyone look the same.
And my dad was a builder, and for years he used to give away neon shirts, but they were really small. But he would give them to the kids, right? The
Mhm,
clients as children. And so the idea was, and I have all my kids have the clothes that that don't fit the subs, or they're I got kid sizes now too. And it's
mhm,
like having three little children. It's like they're constantly running around the house, their little t-shirts on, and the concept was like, hey, your kids are going to wear these a lot longer than a lot of the adults will if they'll wear them at all. But with that in mind, I actually get shirts. I get probably 200 to 300 at a time, and I'll go to the job sites and give them to the roofers, the siders,
mhm,
and just as kind of a thank you. I don't think any builder, not well, I don't know any builder that does that actually, and
mhm,
there's probably a reason for it because I'm not running that by the P&L department. It's definitely an expensive because I have expensive tastes, unfortunately, and so it's like if I'm like you, if I'm gonna wear it, I want it to be nice. And the
mhm.
problem is my taste is probably too nice for the stuff I should be giving away. So, but anyway, so I've been doing that, but now it's like as the brand has been rebranded here in the last 6 months, it's like now I have to get new everything all over
Yeah,
again. And so it seems like every year I do a cycle of kind of my core people. I try to get them shirts and jackets and hats, and before you know it, you've got just a ton of merch out there, and it is fun. They do enjoy it, but
totally.
it's hard to keep paying for that all the time.
We have
I
a
think
bunch of old merch if you want anything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the MC. Tell you what, I'll
MC,
give you a bunch of MDW, and we'll do
merch swap.
a
Memorial Day
swap.
weekend?
Oh yeah.
It's funny, most people in
Memorial Day.
our industry do really like free shirts. I've never like, I don't take any free shirts.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry, like, I either wear my stuff or I wear my non-branded clothes.
Hmm.
And going back to passing them out to other people, like I don't give our merch. Like, I definitely wouldn't give the shirts that my guys wear to anyone else. People ask me to buy them, the sweatshirts. Like, the only way you get that stuff is if you work here. I like the idea of passing it out to everyone on the job, but I think I would do it like, like they do in commercial, where it's like you get a t-shirt for the topping off party, where it's like, hey, I built, this project, and I have a t-shirt to prove it, where I don't know. That's
Well, that's an interesting concept. So I've thought recently I've dove way down into hats, like
mm,
the place that I get a lot of my merch from. And I was listening to I'm blanking on their name. Was it started with an S? What was the name of your graphic company you work with again? You had them on the podcast.
Slash.
Slash. Thank
gosh,
you.
yeah.
Got the S right. And anyway, so Slash was just saying like, you if you went and got something without his approval, he's like, Nick, absolutely not. You run this
Yeah.
by me.
Yep.
And but anyway, where I was going with this was I want where was I going with this? I kind of forgot already.
You went
No,
down the hat
hats.
route.
Yeah, thank you. The hat. So I went to my company. I said, I want these hats. I'm like, yeah, all providers can't get them, or the minimum quantity is like 200. I'm like, no. And so it's like, they're like, so now I'm left to back to myself getting like the coolest hats I want. So I'm going to get like 5 of them. I'm sure minimum quantities of 25. But my thought
Mm,
is I'm not sure anyone's going to pay for them. My wife thinks I'm insane. But my thought is like, I don't really know anything about retail. So I'm going to experiment on the Curious Builder website as well as Mark
mm,
D. Williams website and put a merch channel up there and be like, turns out I'm not going to hire you, but if you want to buy some of these really sweet hats,
yeah.
because they are going to be really cool, but they're expensive. I mean, you know how expensive the nice stuff
Yeah.
is, and it's like, is someone going to pay for that? But continually. I had another builder, actually, I gave a free shirt to one of these guys that was actually, I think it was a cider or a trimmer on another project for a very well-known builder. And the builder, the GC, got really upset with this contractor. And I laughed so hard because I sent him a video because I'm like, he was wearing a hard hat on one of my job sites. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I was giving him a hard time about it. And I know it was Pella Windows, who's one of my sponsors, actually. And they came to an install and the window had been delayed. It was broken. It was like 10 months. It was like a celebration. Just happened to be the day I was delivering shirts. So I outfitted their entire team. And the guy, the general manager who was there, was like, I'm sorry, we can only wear Pella stuff. I'm like, dude, I know the owners. I built him a house. He's going to be fine with this. It's fine. So they all put it on. And once the next day, they all forgot to take them off and they got in trouble.
What type of hats are you getting? Like Kentucky Derby hats?
Ooh, that would be. I'm going to Mexico next week for spring break. A Kentucky Derby hat would be nice for the sun. I'm sure my my dermatologist clients would love the SPF rating on that. That's a very small segment of my hat population. It's very specific. The hard hat. No, actually, it's very Minnesota. Actually, you guys would wear this out in Boston too, and in Philadelphia. But it's an insulated hat with like the earmuffs on it.
Oh yeah,
I saw it at this biking store. I'm like, dude, that is so cool. How have I never thought of that before? So stuff like that.
It's the whole premise behind not handing out merch to anyone that doesn't work here came from a friend of mine who worked for this excavation company. And when they would pass out shirts, they would track how many shirts they give you. And if you ever leave, you have to return all those shirts. And I was like, that's crazy. Why? And he goes, because one day on the news, this guy that, beat someone up, that was like a homeless guy, end up on the news wearing one of his sweatshirts.
That's publicity.
And it's because, yeah, I know. And the guy was like, I don't want, no one gets to wear my shirt unless they work for us.
That's funny you say that. There's a guy at the corner every day when I take my kids to daycare. His name is James. I talk to him about every single day.
Mhm.
And he's a street person. And so every day I say hi to him. I ask, and anyway, after about a year, he got very upset with me. He's like, you come here every single day and you never give me money. And I just said, James, and I'm not trying to be political here. It's just like, and I said, why would I give you money? And he's like, and he didn't have an answer. I'm like, man,
Right.
sell me hard. That was their time to really sell me. And I said, I tell you what, James, I said, I'll buy you clothes. I said, you want food? I get very hangry. So I had a bunch of snacks in my car. I had waters, and I said, can I get you something to eat? And he's like, yeah, but I'm allergic to nuts and I like dairy free. And I was like, oh my word. I said, okay, how about clothes? What can I buy you? And he gave me a list. And so that night I went to Target, bought everything. And you know what? He is the happiest, most outfitted dude on the corner. He always is like so courteous. And like, anyway, next time I think about it, I see him, I'm going to get a bunch of branded Mark Williams stuff and I'm going to own that corner with hat and the whole merch. And I'll send you a video once I do it.
I have an NS Builder sweatshirt, and every time I go out to like commit crimes, I throw it on. Like they're never gonna catch me.
I mean, it's all black. He's already set up for it.
I have one of the old ones.
And this is just mine. I ordered everyone else white and black, and my team's like, oh, can I get a black and black? I'm like, no, it's my covert one.
Don't worry. We know people.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a cardboard box sitting on my desk from you that
so
says, do not open until
there's
I'm
a backstory here.
Okay.
I don't know if I should start, or I mean, the whole premise of this really goes back to the first time. So Nick and I obviously
open it.
You want to open it right now? Or you want
so mine's already open, but I was away.
I'll wait for the story.
My wife received it and was like, "Who's Mark Williams?" And I was like, "I don't know. Open it." And she opened it, and then I was like, "I don't know. I don't even know why this is all sent to me." And then like by the time I forgot about it, by the time I got home and I saw the note, and I was like, "Oh!" And then it said, "Do not open." And I talked to Nick, and I was like, "What's all this stuff?" He's like, "I don't know. I didn't open it. You weren't supposed to open it." And I was like, "Oh, I'm screwed."
All right.
At this
What's
point.
this? Give us the story.
I'll give you the two for you and I obviously met the
when I
Contractor Coalition, Nick, about almost a year ago in May. We can talk more about that later if you want. And Tyler and I had a very eventful first meeting because you talked about on your podcast that I think as you left, you told Brad Levitt from AFT that if you could create my polar opposite, it'd be Mark Williams. And to be completely fair, I think I have a very high caffeinated rate, or I don't know what's wrong with my personality, but when I get you nailed me spot on. I have to say, Tyler, you are listening to your podcast over the last 6 months, you're probably one of the best question askers I've ever listened to. You're very talented, but I think your ability to read people is spot on, because you only met me the one time and you nailed a ton of my personality traits right off the bat. But anyway, you said that essentially meeting me was like, meeting a guy who had just had 6 cans of Red Bull and a line of Coke. So I sent that to my family. They died laughing. My sister, my parents, my cousins are like, whoever this Tyler guy is, he nailed you. He knows exactly. So without further ado, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't get there right now. Nick, I sent this both to you guys to unopen. Tyler will forgive him, but Nick, you can go ahead and open up your box. This is since we're talking about merch, this actually was pretty appropriate.
After I just said,
it's making more sense to me now.
After I just said I don't take other merch.
Yeah. Oh, you'll wear this at least once.
That's funny. So I got a Red Bull hat. Wait a second, and a line of
That's
Coke.
a line of Coke.
So you. That's amazing.
I gotta be careful what I say because I don't even remember half the shit that I say.
Well, it was so spot on, Tyler. I mean, you nailed it. I get and you even said like, hey, one-on-one, he's quieter.
And I have a
more
Sport Tech. What is this? A polyester?
Yeah, but where do you see the images?
I get 6 cans of Red Bull and a line of Coke.
Yeah, that's my personality shirt. So there you go. That was born from Tyler, patent pending. Yeah, you're welcome.
It's amazing. Hold on,
and it's kid friendly. When I outgrow it, I'm gonna give it to my kids to wear to school.
They'll be like, "What is this?" You know what? It was really funny. I've actually DM'd Red Bull to see if I could get him on as a sponsor because I thought this would be a pretty good story. I mean, it'd be awesome to say you're sponsored by Red Bull. They have not responded to my request.
Nah, that's a big ask.
I know.
Well, so when you went to get those shirts made,
yes.
Who did you
Why would I be allergic?
Read the back out loud, probably.
Mark D. Williams Custom Homes is known for its high level of sappiness and wishes your family to experience a sugar high of being cared for. Dude, this is
so that's maple syrup that we sent out from a local place in Minnesota to our clients on Valentine's Day of last year. I had an extra one, so
53 grams of sugar.
I mean, that's pretty much the same as 6 Red Bulls and a line of Coke. You drink a bottle of that, and your kids will bounce through the ceiling.
So when you went to get the shirts made, what did the company say about your images, or did they not ask?
I don't. You know what? I send them a lot of ridiculous asks.
It's just a white mustache.
Yeah, white mustache. I explained it to him, and they complied. I mean, it's not. I mean, I didn't get a proof. I was in a hurry because I didn't know when I was going to come on the Modern Craftsman. So I was like, I got to get these made like ASAP. So I like crushed it through. I had those made like 2 months ago. And I was like, well, I can't send them too early. I actually thought that, Tyler, you seem so thoughtful and like good at reading details. I thought for sure you wouldn't open it. I thought for sure Nick would blast through that bag on day one. So it's hilarious to me that it's
I was not home, and I was like, just a million things going on. My wife's like, who's Mark Williams? I was like, I have no idea. Open it, see what's in it. And then when she opened it, I was like, I don't know. Like I have no idea what's going on right now. I'll check it out when I get home.
I think
she didn't read the letter,
and it still didn't click.
No, when I got home and read the letter, I was like, oh, okay, now I knew who this is. But I think it was at the festival event maybe when it came.
Oh, sure.
And I was just completely distracted. But then when I read the letter, I was like, okay, this makes
sense. Do I have that?
This is a moment in time.
Ahead?
March 28th. Is the first time that Nick has ever donned a non-NS Builder hat.
Yeah. I think you should give them out to
I
the
actually
team,
don't
Nick.
know if I don't think it fits. Oh, here we go. Never mind. What'd you say?
I think that you should give them to the team. So these are the hats that you want to make, Mark,
this
that
is
are all really
not. It almost looks like a submarine. It looks like a naval submarine.
Or like Red Bull plus worm.
They couldn't come up with a line of Coke that looked, I don't know. I was thinking, Tony Montana or Montoya from Scarface, it got a little ridiculous. So anyway, that was that. I'm sure that's why people tuned in, is to hear this ridiculousness, but that's fine. That's just part of the personality.
I mean, people, sometimes I don't know why people tune in. This is usually how these go. The conversation.
Hey, I mean, according to you guys, you're highest rated performance with no guest. So, I'll sign off now and your ratings will just spike.
We say that every time and we're like, we need a guest.
No.
Mark, so you said that you're a 3rd generation builder?
Yep. So my grandpa built just a little bit, but then he was in the service industry, owned gas stations and that. And then my dad went to flight school in Omaha. He was born in 1950. So you would have been probably early 60s. And he came out and Vietnam was ending. And so a lot of I guess that would have been late 60s, early 70s. And he, so all the pilots were getting the airline jobs. So he decided to build. So he flew private airplanes around in Minnesota. I think he flew Hubert Humphrey, who was a politician back in the 70s here around, and some other private individuals. And then borrowed some money from his uncle who owned some gas stations, built a house, and it's like, hey, this is great. And then they built homes for 30 years. My mom was an interior designer, and I knew it was the one thing I didn't want to do. Because why would you want to do what your parents do? I'm not rebellious, but I'm firstborn, and I was like, oh, I'm going to pave my own way. I'm going to do my own thing. So I had a lawn mowing business in high school, sold in college, sold copiers. I was in sales for a year. That's the only time I've ever worked for somebody else.
Did you say you sold your lawn care business?
Yeah, paid for half my college selling my lawn care business, which is hilarious because I think I was 16, got my driver's license, printed out these little green cards on little, inkjet printer or whatever, stamped. You know, what are those dumb cutting things like look like a bad machete, and you cut them on the paper or whatever. And I just went door to door and started knocking on people's doors. And
how did you sell that business?
How did I sell it? I don't know. I said, hey, do you want 15, 20 grand for my book of business? I had like 10 clients, and the guy's like, sure. And so I sold it, and that was that. I don't think I was so I don't know, I guess.
No, I mean that, like, you don't hear that a lot. Like, I think selling a service-based business in general is very difficult, and creating valuation around it and things like that. But to be a teenager or, pre-college, when you think about all the kids that had lawn mowing businesses that I knew, like when they just stopped doing it, they never thought to sell the book of business. You're the first, truthfully, like, I've never heard anyone doing that for a business like that.
Well, so I don't know. Someone must have put the idea in me, and I ran with it. And,
that's good. That's cool.
So that's actually quite a while ago. I don't remember all the details on it at this point, but I do remember. I remember listening to a lot of Louis Moore book tapes. I used to have my old Walkman and put them under my noise canceling. I didn't have noise canceling headphones, just big earmuffs. And I would just mow I'd mow fast. I remember this one guy actually worked for.
I could see you mowing a lawn very fast, believe it or not.
Shocker, right, Tyler? This is actually a funny story. So we had some acreage growing up. So my parents bought a big 0-turn, 50-inch radius mower or whatever. So I mowed my yard, then I started mowing the neighbors, and you get I think I got a lot of money. I don't want to say gouging because they're big, but it was like $70 or $80 per yard. I didn't charge by the hour, so I would just hammer those handles down. I would just crush it. And basically based on how long the book tape was, and if it was coming up to the end, I got done quick. So anyway, long story short, I started expanding, started doing more and more. And I went into a neighborhood. I was mainly set up for acreage estates. I was much better at that. Anyway, it was a small yard, and I didn't have a small lawnmower. So I'm like, hey, if I get like 5 or 6 of these at like $30, I mean, I could crush these in like 5 minutes. Like, I haven't told the story in a long time. And the yard was really undulated, and I don't know what was wrong with it. And it didn't matter. I just absolutely hammered across it. And so bad customer service. I skipped across, and I just mohawked the top of it, just dirt, just cut all his yard. Totally. He fired me, not too surprisingly. And anyway, he's like, no attention to detail, and I'm like, man, I got the thing done fast though. And so
that's the name of the game with lawn cutting.
Just speed. So anyway, if you're listening to this, if you're executive from Polaris and you lived in Victoria, I don't remember your name, but I apologize that you hired a 17-year-old kid who was very excited to work on your yard, but did not have a smaller lawnmower. So I'll do a better job next time.
What'd you go to college for?
Communication and business. So I went to the University of Minnesota, and I think for me, it's interesting because this came up with Nick and I when we were talking at the Contractor Coalition, but it's also come up on your podcast a few times. Just and we can dive into this actually quite a bit with education. And I think for me, college was just maturing. Which clearly I haven't done yet. And so I think that time frame really just allowed me to I didn't really network that much. Actually, I had even for a big school, I mean, the University of Minnesota is a big campus, but I mean, I really had like 4 friends. And was not a partier. I did athletics, and I was just I had like 4 people, and like we just did everything together. And so my college experience for a big school, I think, was pretty unique. It was just very small. And I had a large kind of family network, and across the country, just people that I spent time with. That college was just a very different experience for me. And now, I guess, like a lot of people, I would love to go back to college now. I'm just fascinated with learning, and I absolutely, crush book tapes even still. and no longer Louis L'Amour, sadly, because I've memorized them all. It's now more, learning books. And Nick, and every time you guys throw on a book, I just finished Fair Play actually last week. Nick, you brought that up a couple of podcasts ago, and about marriage and listening. And I called my wife up out of the blue. She's a hospitalist, and I called her, and she was at work, and you could tell she was like, "Why are you calling me? We only call each other when she's at work if something's going on with the kids." And I'm like, I just want it, and you could tell in her voice like she was a little impatient that I called. And I just said, I just want to tell you that I appreciate all the things that you do for me that I don't know, that I don't understand, and that I haven't said thank you for. I just finished this book, and
Mark, are you day drinking again?
I mean, I'm drinking a lot of water. Anyway, it was hilarious to watch her mood change, and she like immediately went from like, just on edge, like, why are you calling me? This better be good, to thank you. That was really nice. And so anyway, thanks, Nick. I got some good credit there with Mrs. Williams for your book credit. Now I got to follow through on it. Reading it was only step one. Step two is, doing all the other work.
Yeah, and it's funny. I talked to my wife about that book as well, because she saw it on the nightstand. She was like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just learning to be a better husband over here." And I was like, "It's also actually written for the woman."
The
woman's perspective.
Yep.
And I got through it, and she's like, "So what do you think?" I'm like, I'm not saying it because I think that I'm better than her husband, but I'm pretty sure her husband sucks. And the shit that like he doesn't do it that they talk about in the book, like I do all of that. So I think that our relationship's pretty good. She goes, "Yeah, you think?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty confident."
But did you follow through and get the cards on the website and fill it out and do the whole exercise?
I didn't do the exercise. I bought the cards, but I never.
It's funny. I bought the cards. Amazon has not delivered them. What's funny about this is I tend to buy these books that are written for women, evidently, because it was written for the females. For the way I read the book it was for the spouses to get, the misters to listen to it. And I cannot. Anytime I read a book like that, I can't get my wife to read it. She's like the 5 love languages. She's like, "Well, I know it all." I'm like, "Well, don't you want a refresher course? Like, do you want to talk about it?" And
negative.
Not interested.
Yeah, my wife like read like the first chapter and was like, "Yeah, I'm not reading this." I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "This the whole point of this is like it is supposed to be for us, but that's fine."
No. Anyway.
She had said something about, sorry, Tyler. She said something about going. She was like, "I would be interested in going to like that Jocko event." And I was like, "Oh, really?" She goes, "Yeah, you just never asked me." I'm like, "I didn't think you'd want to go to hang out with a bunch of Navy SEALs."
It's just the point that you didn't ask her.
And I was like, yeah, but then I was like, "But you have to read the book. You have to read both his books in order to go." And I know what my wife reads, and I'm like, "You're not going to read 2 massive books about Navy SEALs and leadership."
What is the leadership of the economy? That's one of them, right?
Yeah,
and extreme ownership.
And extreme ownership. It's
that was
like
good. That was a good book.
They're great books. I just, and I'm not saying that my wife couldn't read it, but it's just not of an interest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're probably right.
This is actually surprising. And Tyler, please correct me if I'm wrong. So I say this with as a compliment, but actually, this is actually kind of funny. Tyler, you actually remind me a lot of my wife. I'm gonna.
I'll take it.
She's a very smart person. I'm extremely extroverted. She's very introverted. She's much more thoughtful than I am. And I was going to ask you this question, and I only say this, and again, as a compliment, I want to preface this for those that are listening. It's been about 3-4 months since you've talked a lot about, you've talked on the podcast a lot about, your anxiety and, just things that you've done in your lifestyle to help combat that. And after I listened to you, because I actually had never listened to a podcast, period, till 6 months ago. We'll talk a little bit maybe later about how I got onto podcasts and then started one on a whim. But going back to that conversation as a preface was, my wife can be very anxious, but my wife is one of the most thoughtful, empathetic, and phenomenal listeners that I've ever met. And I wondered now, it wasn't until I listened to you and listened to you talk a little bit about yourself on the podcast that I realized that, do you realize that I think it's actually your superpower? And I'd be curious to see, well, no, I say that in a positive way. Like, I'm honestly blown away at how good you are at asking insightful questions. Nick often compliments you as well. Like, that's a really thoughtful question. I don't operate that way. A lot of times I'm speaking and I want to know how the sentence ends because I want to know what I'm going to say because I honestly don't know where it's going to go, which makes me very good at ad lib, but very terrible at like really deep, thought-provoking questions. Yeah. And so I just wondering if you realize that about yourself, that do you feel like for yourself, you feel like that's a superpower? Because now having a podcast and hosting people, like I have a different tack. I just feel like you're very talented at asking questions. And I'm curious if you realize, or if you think that has somewhat to do with, like, I know it has to do with your personality, but do you think anxiety is the right thing that leads to that? Or am I misunderstanding where that superpower comes from?
So I'm not as extroverted as most people, and I really don't love small talk. So most of my conversations that I have with people, I enjoy a deeper conversation, more of a one-on-one. I'm not the type that's going to go to a party and socialize and just mingle and network. Like, that's Nick. That's probably what you do. I would rather have a one-on-one with somebody, and I've been that way my entire life, which is probably social anxiety contributing to that. I just like it's not what I enjoy doing. I get very uncomfortable in those situations, so I'd rather peel off and have a one-on-one conversation with somebody. So yeah, I'm sure that it's personality and anxiety, and I don't have a huge amount of patience for just like bullshit small talk where I'm like, all right, this is the same crap that everyone says to each other and it's going nowhere. So I do tend to like to dig into deeper things, ask deeper questions. I didn't realize um that was something that I did until a couple of people noted it, or that they appreciated the interview questions. Because most of the time, even when John used to be on, I would just sit back and listen. And I'm like, all right, there's a lot going on right now, and I'm either going to make a smart ass comment, and I can banter with anyone. It's just like, at what point are we going to get down to it and actually have a conversation? So that probably doesn't answer your. If anything, I would say this social anxiety probably contributes to that. I'm just not one to mingle.
I would say, again, I feel like, and hopefully all our spouses, those listening, I told my wife this other day, I think it's not always easy when it's easier when you are with people that are like you for in a variety of ways, but that doesn't make you a better person. I would say that I've been married now for coming up on 10 years. I'm a much better person than I would be, obviously, without my spouse, and it doesn't make it always easy. But one thing that I think I'm a bit of a hybrid. I can do both. I think my natural default, obviously, I like a classic extrovert, I get energy from people. So like a big event, like I am literally drawing energy and I'm just wound up. I'll come home and it's like, if you could see like an infrared scope around me, I'm sure it'd just be like glowing, like, multiple colors of the rainbow. And where my wife would just be drained, which is a classic, introvert. There's a really interesting
that's
book.
me for sure.
There's an interesting book actually called Quiet. I should probably reread it again. It's been about 5 or 6 years. I don't know if either one of you have read it, but it's basically The Power of an Introvert. It's actually a super interesting book. Anyway, I digress. But where I was going with this is I now appreciate much more the one-on-one interactions. And Tyler, I don't know if I've given you this compliment before. Before I exploded with the whole roundtable thing, and partly that day that I met you, I hadn't seen Brad in about 5 months, and I was just so wound up.
You were pretty jacked up.
I mean, even by my standards, I was like through the roof, out of control, like hyper. And so I could not contain myself that day. I'm sorry. But anyway, right before you gave me, you had a one-on-one conversation. I think I was more baseline, and you gave me some really good tips on, I was just starting the podcast or gathering the information for it. And you gave me a really interesting point of view on sponsorships. And one of the things that you shared with me that I've tried to employ, and you've talked about it now on the podcast too, is, give your sponsors more than they ask for. And so, for instance, for us, let's say you're a season sponsor, we do 4 videos, which is something you had said, hey, we do some videos. So we did some videos. We did obviously our ad reads, which are important as well. But then on top of that, we're going to do a few blog posts. I'm now looking into doing some live events, and I'm really excited about that. But anyway, obviously we take it and brand it, make it our own after that. But that original seed thought, you really helped me kind of navigate, like, oh, that's a great concept. Okay, let's do that. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything to help. That was some of the things that I wanted to touch on today about your podcast and how that's going for you. Before we get to that, what did you think you were going to do after college? You said you didn't want to work for your dad's company.
Yeah.
You didn't want to be you didn't want to be a builder.
Yeah, I didn't want to be a builder. I have no idea. I think I was just gonna. So Here's another pie in your face story. So I interviewed at well, it doesn't matter. 3M. I interviewed at Medtronic. I wanted to actually do biotech 'cause that seemed really cool, but it's like, well, do you have a medical background? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So I'm like, okay, well, that's out. So, but like, I can sell. Like, I know I have the personality. So let's do that. So that was great. This really funny story, just to embarrass myself, I guess, is I took Spanish in high school or college. I was not very good at it. It was probably the most. I need to be immersed in something. I need to practice it every day. Otherwise, I just don't get it. I can't learn things out of a book. So I just need to do it. And anyway, on my resume, I just put Spanish. I didn't say I speak Spanish. I didn't say fluently. It just had the word Spanish on my resume. Well, it turns out the fourth interviewer of 3M was a former Spanish teacher from Pittsburgh, actually. And remember Cordell Stewart, was it Slash? What was his nickname? The football player for the Steelers.
Oh, I don't remember.
Anyway, so I was like trying to make, like, oh, hey, Slash. And he's like, yeah, you ruined our franchise. I'm like, ooh, strike one. That was a bad call on my part. And the second one, he's like, oh, I see Spanish. And I got really hot. And he just started launching into his interview in Spanish. And I got really hot. And I go, okay. Okay. I mean, I was instantly the center of the sun, temperature hot. And anyway, needless to say, they did not offer me a job. So anyway, I got into sales for copier sales. Evidently, that was the only people that would take me, an energetic person with not a lot of experience. And so I sold copiers, did their 2-week training program, and I loved it, actually. You made 100 phone calls a day. They had a leaderboard of who was calling the most people. I'm like, well, hey, I can pick up a phone and call people. Like, even if nobody talks to me, like, I can make the calls. And it was all a numbers game. Like, hey, if you make 100 calls, you'll get 20 appointments. If you make 20 appointments, you'll get 6. So it taught me a little bit about, CRM, and all that kind of stuff. And so I sold copiers for a year, but after that, I'm like very unfulfilled, wearing a suit and tie. Like, that's just not obviously what I wanted to do or be. And so I actually asked an uncle of mine who was a chiropractor. I said, what do you think I should do? And my parents at this point had retired, from their business maybe 5-6 years before that. And he said, well, have you ever thought about building? I think it was just the right person at the right, because it's like, hello.
Yeah.
And so I was like, sure, why not? So it's like, you don't need a license, to build a house for yourself in Minnesota. So I was like, I built, borrowed some money and built a house. And halfway through, I'm like, this is amazing. So I sold my silver Jetta. I bought a silver truck. I got my builder license and sold my first house to actually the realtor who was listing it, which is interesting. And then I built another home, and halfway through, a lady came through that had just gotten out of divorce and bought that house. And then I was on my way, and I was able to navigate kind of that 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 deal, because I didn't have much to lose. I mean, it was just me. I had no family. I didn't really have a lot of overhead. So a lot of other builders in Minnesota and probably around the country either had bigger land investments or more. I didn't have anything. So if you don't have anything to lose, when the market changes, I guess, it was a good time to not have. I give a lot of credit to anyone that has a family and starts a new business, because that's a whole nother realm that I couldn't even fathom doing now.
How much did you lean on your dad for that initial build, or was he completely independent of that?
That's a great question. My dad and I are very similar. We've often wondered, we would have been fine, but my dad and I are very similar. I mean, we could easily finish each other's sentences. Our personalities are very. He knew how to run a business, and
your poor mom. I can't imagine.
No, she's an extreme introvert. My dad's the hybrid.
You must have just her head must have just blown up every single day with you two in the same house.
Well, it's different. Actually, my dad would be a hybrid from a personality and outgoing nature. People would perceive him to be an extrovert, and he is. I guess he's a hybrid. But my mom is actually the real extrovert. I often laugh that because she often works my parade home. So up here in Minnesota, we actually have celebrating our 75th anniversary for the parade of homes, which is the oldest in the country. And so, they had parade homes. She's very used to talking to people. And she was, of course, an interior designer, loves doing it. She's, I think, 72 now. And she'll still, when I have an artisan home tour or parade home tour, she'll sit upstairs and talk to people, and people love her. And my joke is that, she could talk to a rock for 5 hours, and the rock would be like, lady, I need some time. I need some space. I mean, my mom, bless her heart, can talk to anyone about anything for any length of time. And so I guess learning that from her is somewhat helpful and somewhat annoying, I'm sure, to those around me. But it is a skill that I guess
should start a podcast.
She would be amazing. Actually, what's funny? I'm actually I'm going to bring my dad and my uncle were builders as well. Actually, I'm trying to bring them on as on the podcast. I think it'd be very interesting. Plus, when am I going to get a chance to interview my dad and my uncle at some point? Down the road when they're gone. Hopefully, they're here for a long time. But I thought it'd just be kind of a cool passing of the torch deal to interview people that you watch them build homes for 3 decades. I thought that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So when that first house that you built, did you go into that blindly? Was that something
Totally
that you
blind.
ended up leaning
No.
on your dad a lot for? Did you have help?
Yeah, so my dad gave me advice, a few things that came up, and it's funny now. I often quote my dad, but now I've switched dad because at 42, it's like, does everyone want to hear about my dad all the time? So I often will say when I'm talking to clients, like, "Oh, I had someone once tell me this," or like a wise philosopher. I don't say wise philosopher, but basically, I stopped quoting my dad as my dad because I don't know. At some point, do people really want to? They care where it came from? And so, but three things that always stuck out in my mind. One was he said you could be a good builder and bad at business, and you won't make it. And he goes, you could be good at business and be a bad builder, and you could make it. And hopefully, you're good at both. I remember that as as a grade schooler, him telling me that. And then the other thing that he often told me is because I remember interviewing him early on for a paper, probably in high school or something, where you interview your parents or their career day or something. And I asked him, I said, like, what has made you successful? And he said, honestly, the bar is so low that he said, just doing what you say and follow through. And I remember, like, that's like a 2-sentence like paper. Like, my teacher's not going to accept a 2-sentence paper.
Yeah.
But now as I'm older, it's like very, just common stuff like calling people back. It's not rocket science. Like a lot of stuff, Nick is obviously, we can go down there later, but is educated on so many different nuances, and he's so good at, structuring his business. But really the basics is just do what you say you're going to do, and, be ethical, be honest, and frankly open the door. I mean, it's like kind of like this thing of like opening the door for old people and women. And it's like, like who wouldn't do that? But like realizing that so many people don't. It's sort of, anyway, where I'm going with this is just like, just be better. Just be better. And by doing that, everything else will come and follow. And so that was some of the things that dad taught me early on. But anyway, when I got back to your question about being in business, I think I actually leaned more on my mom. My dad knew how to build a house, but he built about 40 homes a year, totally different than what I do. I build about
Yeah.
4 homes a year. And my mom was an interior designer. And so I definitely have more of my mom's eye for detail and interior design. And I'm certainly not an interior designer, but I think I like my poor architects. I think that I play a little too much. I play in the sandbox of their world because I'm not talented enough to be an architect, but I definitely know what I like and the look I'm trying to achieve. And so I've partnered myself and aligned myself with, architects that are open-minded enough to say, hey, this builder is very curious, and, we can work together. I often bring and here in Minnesota, most of the clients come through the builders first. So we're often bringing them to the architects. And I would like that to change. I would like to get referrals from architects. And that's, one of the things that I'm trying. Why, what?
Why do you want the referral from the architect instead?
Well, I look at some other builders around me that are, let's say, a tier above me, or, or whatever their tier is. And I ask them, I said, how many of your builds come from architects? And they're like 60%. And, it's, I don't mind hustling, but it's like, man, we work so hard to get our leads, and our own reputation generates our own sales. And it's like, but I can't think maybe one time an architect has ever reached out to me and said, hey, here's a client who's interested. Are you interested? Like, just zero. And it just seems like a bad business plan not to like have another avenue. It's like realtors. Like, I do have relationships with real estate agents. We don't get a lot of homes through agents, especially at the higher price point that we are now. And because people usually are doing tear downs for what I do, I don't buy land. And so I don't do any spec homes anymore, any models. And so, but I do probably get one every other year. And it's like, I don't want to close a door. So it just seems like and I love, by the way, like some of the architecture, some of the work I see is like, oh, I really want to be a part of that. And the only way to do it is either have a client who comes to me and says, I love what you do. And then I bring him to that higher end architect, or that higher architect, has some clients and comes to me.
It's interesting. It's an interesting perspective because, and I've never thought of it this way, but it makes me wonder, are they more qualified coming through an architect? But, and based on what you just said, it would seem as though it is, because like, okay, they know they're working with a prominent architect, this is the style I want to do, I want to build. But I've been on that side of it, and we've, priced that work, and then next thing you know, it's like, oh, you're too expensive. It's like, I'm not too expensive. You've designed a home that you can't afford. Where, I've actually told the story that, oh no, a lot of our clients come to us, and then we put the team together, and almost in a celebratory way, where it's like, no, they see us as the glue, as the value, and then we can kind of pick and choose the architect. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about all of the client persona I guess I would, or like the avatar of those clients, like who and what they do and their financial position, and like does it, is a more, I guess what I'm saying is a more wealthy client never going to come to the builder and work directly from an architect down. Um, it's more of an observation than anything, but I've always really appreciated that the client comes to us and says, no, we understand, like, your craftsmanship, and now we just need to partner with an architect that can deliver information to you in a way that allows you to execute properly. Because I think that's oftentimes the issue where, we operate a very particular way, and we require a ton of information and input from our architects, and a lot of residential architects just don't provide that.
or
Or
want to be involved with that level of design. A lot of
yeah,
times that's not where they make their money.
yeah. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were like, well, it was actually a new architect, and they were like, well, what are you typically seeing for pages in a drawing set? And I said, well, we like when a drawing set's over 100 pages, that, like, that's where we want to, like, that's the level of detail we want to see. But most of the time it's under 60. And he laughed and he goes, dude, last house I built had 12 pages. I'm like, no, that's not our style. It just puts everything on us, and it's just stuff doesn't get flushed out. And then that's when you end up with, like, just clashes and soffits and shit that just doesn't work.
I feel like we have a foot in two worlds, early on, and we had an architect, or I should say a home designer, on our podcast here in Minnesota named David Charles, and he kind of walked through the audience through, home design, draftsman, architect, and it seems like the AIA is more geared towards commercial. And so they've a lot of architects that I've spoken to, well, they've gotten their AIA, and I'm sure they're schooling, they're using it, but it's kind of like the commercial world AIA has sort of turned its nose up at residential. Like, there's some really cool cutting edge residential designs. And so it'd be curious to see what the future holds. And one architect I was talking to had kind of mentioned that, I don't think it's necessarily chat GDP or GPT. But he thought that a lot of architecture is going to actually get automated at some point, because you're going to give it parameters, and it's going to be able to. Now, it's still art to me, and it's still very creative. So I don't. But he's an architect. He's the one who said, like, hey, I think we'll still have to sign off on it and overview it. But a lot of the work now is going to be. I mean, look at how sophisticated the 3D renderings are getting. I mean, they're incredible. Sometimes you got to look at your phone a couple times. You're like, wait, is that? That's not real. Wow, that looks real. And so it's some of that technology is really changing. But going back to the original question, I guess, which was, why do I want those architects? I want to do some of that higher end work. I mean, I'm really interested in that. And I may, there are people that tell me, like, be careful what you wish for. And it's just interesting. And I don't know how much of it is Minnesota market versus outstate. But I mean, there's really talented architects here that I would like to work with. And, you look at, like, I know you're doing that one with, was it Steve Teak?
Yep.
And, like, that's a beautiful home. Like, that level of detail, I would like to do some of that. And I feel like here locally, there's a couple of really high-end interior designers, and we're starting to get some leads from them for remodels, which is unusual. Usually we don't get a lot of leads through our design contacts. But yeah, I think people now, because of social media and just the photos are so great, that clients follow these incredible interior designers and are like, hey, we love this. And then, they may be a point of contact as well. So anyway, all doors are open, but to me, it's still a relationship. I would never just look at a job and just bid it. Like, I need a relationship, and we're a small enough team that we can't take on every project, nor do we want to. And I think that actually hopefully would attract architects to us and be like, hey, here's a partner who wants to work with us, and kind of go through that. Because, I don't love the word, but it gets thrown around a lot. Value engineer. I mean, every builder across the country is probably cringing right now. Value engineer just means, how can I do the same product cheaper? Like, it's not the same. Something's changed. And so, to your point, Nick, if you have 100 pages versus 20 pages, like, something's different. And guess what? You're paying somebody to figure out. And in that case, it's the GC.
So what's preventing you from going to these architects and bringing a lead to them?
Nothing. And I have. The problem a little bit is, and this is what I meant by I have a foot in two worlds. I have a foot in the world where for me, most of my homes are kind of 1.5 to 4 million. I would love to do more in the 2 to 6 million. I think if someone came to me to do a $10 million house, we'd figure it out. We'd probably scale up to do it. But I mean, I've kind of joked like, hey, if you want a 20,000, 30,000 square foot house, like I'll give you the name and number of two guys that I'm friends with that's what they do. And hopefully if they met someone who wanted to do a $5 million house at 4,000 square feet, they give me my number. I don't think they would. But the point of it is like, I'm really good in my niche. I think frankly, I just think we're the best at what we do, but we're in a very small niche. And sometimes our clientele is right in between two worlds. And the ones that have gone really well are the ones that appreciate that and are willing to spend a little bit more. But we often have clients that say, hey, we want to be under 2 million. And we can do under 2 million, but they usually start at 1.5 and end up between 1.5 and 2. And it's that threshold that becomes a little more, I can't take them to an architect that does some of the work that I want to do that I'm interested in, because are they interested in it? Do they appreciate it? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I know they can't afford it. And so then it's like, I have to make a value judgment right then and there. Like, okay, I'm not bringing them to these three architects. I'm going to bring them to these two. And I really only try two, because any more than that, it's kind of like if someone wants 5 bids, like I'm out. That's I'm not interested. And so, frankly, we rarely bid anything, because to me, it's so relationship based. And, we've talked about this a lot, Nick and I have at the coalitions, and just in general, I want to create a relationship, because I'm going to be with this client for multiple years of design and everything. It's like, we've thankfully had very few difficult clients. We've had one or two. And it's like, honestly, if we had more than that, like I probably would not stay in building. It's that difficult. And building is got to be one of the more difficult careers you can choose, for how emotional it is, how complicated it is. And so really picking the right person to work with, because when it goes well, it's a beautiful relationship, and they're so excited. They're so thankful. And like, a lot of my clients have known me before I was married, before I had kids. And like, you see, they are like happy when you send your holiday card, like they're happy for you in like a family way that other businesses, well, sometimes we talk about the negative emotion. There's a lot of positive emotion too. And so I think remembering that and celebrating that. And I love the fact that we create a family, not only with our clients, but also with our trade partners. And it's just a really rewarding business, although difficult.
So what do you think that you can do to transition into that market? Was that somewhat of the impetus for the rebrand?
It was part of it. I think, frankly, most of my good ideas have come from my wife. She said it's time for a new wardrobe, new brand change. And she was right.
Yeah.
I think men, or I should just speak for myself, it's like, well, that's good. It's not broken. It looks great. Like, why do I need to fix it? And then as soon as I, hired this company, who, again, my wife picked, pretty much everyone my wife has suggested has just hit it out of the park. So at this point, at 10 years, I really just need to listen to her more. And she's even said, my wife is a physician, and she said, maybe I should quit my job and just be an interior designer. I'm like, oh, no, honey. I don't think you understand. We, would have to change our lifestyle quite a bit, because we cannot afford you to basically be an interior designer, because our interior designers don't, make that much for, I guess our lifestyle. But my point is, she's really good at it, and she's a good doctor as well. But I think where I'm going with this is, like, she sees things not only from her perspective as my spouse, but also just she has a better lens, especially at the viewpoint on design and so much of this stuff. So she's been really spot on with the rebrand, with like our target market, with our social media strategy, all of those things. And she's like 10 for 10. So it's like, I just got to listen.
So what do you think is the first thing that you would have to implement to move towards that caliber of customer?
Customer or architect?
That customer, right? You said that you're within like a 1 to 3 million range right now, and you want to be a 2 to 6. So to me, listening to it and seeing what I've done, what people like Nick have done, you can sit around and wait for those jobs to land on your plate, or wait for those architects to knock on your door. But the more realistic approach is, you have to make an internal change that's going to attract those customers to you. So like, what do you think is the first step towards getting there?
I think we've actually already been doing it. I don't think I've given our team enough credit, because, I think it's just kind of, this rebrand has really taught me a lot. Because, for instance, we are not the same company that I was 5 years ago. And we're definitely not the same company we were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so we have taken those steps organically, kind of this thing like, I'll build you a killer sauna. I'll build you a killer house. Like, I actually don't care about the project. I want to work on really unique, cool things. And ultimately, I think our clients have led us to where we go. I mean, my first house was 550,000, which is nothing to sniff at, because that was a really nice house at that time. It was a great house. I mean, it still could be a great house. It's just I can't be anywhere in that realm anymore with our cost structure and the detail. And I mean, the homes that we build now are just so much superior to those homes. But it's really because our clients, like, I still remember the first $1 million house I had. And then after that house, and it was a 1.5. And so I feel like we sort of are doing that. The rebrand has definitely been a part of that. Like, our old brand no longer represented who we had already become. So it's kind of like this brand refresh was really just not only attracting the clients that we want, but but also recognizing who we had become already, sort of. And I think we won Builder of the Year 2 years ago, which I think we might be, well, I assume we're the smallest company ever to do that. We only have 5 people on staff, and most of our competition is 10, 15, 20, 30 people. So that really, I mean, our name has been around for a long time, but a lot of people still come to our parades house and like, who's Mark Williams? And I kind of it's like, my name tag, usually says Mark Williams right there. I'm like, it's me. And then they usually look down, they look up, they look down, they look up. Like, they can't really, hey, how does this face and this name the same? That they just don't, I don't know if they think I'm young, or I don't know what it is that they're thinking. And then it takes them a while to be like, oh, okay, well, you're the builder. I'm like, yep, I'm the builder. Nice to meet you. Well, thank you for coming to our home. And, but the whole point of it is, to your question is, I think, the podcast, all of these things, I think, in concert, just continue to make the 1% improvements. One of the books I read, blanking on the name of it now, but it was about the British cycling team that just basically made 1% improvements continually. And, by the end, they were just so much superior to those around them. And I'm not trying to beat my competition. I'm just trying to be a better version of myself. And so I think specifically, like, this next year, even the podcast, having architects on the podcast to develop that relationship and realize, I sometimes wonder, I've never asked this question before, but I have a fairly loud personality, as we've already discussed. And I don't know that if a architect wants a yes man or if they want me. And if they want a yes man, that's not me, and I can't pretend to be something I'm not. It takes too much energy to be somebody you're not. But I'll be a collaborator. I'd be out. So I don't know, and I don't know, because I've done some work with some high-end architects, and they've been great. And so I've really started developing those relationships more on a personal level, rather than just asking them, hey, I'd like to bid your work, which I think is probably okay too. But really, it's kind of, my plan would be to have 10 architects I know, and 3 that I really work with. And because we bring our clients to architects as well, but it also has to be a good fit. And so the last thing I want to do is bring a client who's trusting me and saying, hey, my budget's $2 million. Like I said, I can't bring him to the architect that's going to design a $5 million house with them, even with me sitting right next to him saying, like, ooh, yeah, we can't do that, we can't do that. I don't want to set it up to fail from the beginning. So anyway, I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's.
No, I think that you have. It seems like you're putting all the things in place to get there. I guess my other question with regard to that would be, like, what's your reasoning for looking to get into that market? Are you looking to maintain the same size business, like as far as employees, and the same scale of team, and just do a higher caliber of work, be able to make more money doing relatively the same volume, the same amount of builds per year? What's your reasoning for looking to move in that direction?
I think number one, I'm just interested in architecture. I'm really interested in really high-end work. And so I want to be a part of it. I think it's, for no others. I mean, there's more reasons, I guess, but it's cool. Like, I'm energized by the detail. I'm energized by building something that other people can't. Like, this is really, the craftsmanship behind it is just very appealing to me. And, I'd rather build a Maserati than a Ford Focus. I can't explain why. And I think my skill set is also better suited for that. That being said, I definitely feel like I'm a war at my personalities, because my personal life, and Nick and I have talked a little bit about this offline, but my personal life, I'm pretty bad at this actually. I try to get less distraction. As I get older, I have 3 kids, time with my children, time with my family. I've set a lot of parameters in my personal life to help protect those relationships and to stay fresh and to stay invigorated, things that you guys have talked about on your show. But the entrepreneurial side and the business side wants everything. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do this. I want to do that. So when I going back to your team thing, is like, I feel like I want to stay small because I'm involved and I can control it. But all my decisions that I keep making keep pushing me up against this wall where it's like I want to go, but I don't want to go. And someone very close to me on my team has said, until you decide what you want to do, you're going to continue to struggle. And I am, and I don't know how to get through that. I hired, she hasn't started yet, but she was just on your podcast, Jordan. Jordan is coming in to do an analysis of us, I think in May. And hopefully she can shed some light on, my hot mess of a decision making, because I feel like I just need direction. And I feel like I'm at that point where, and someone has told me before, we do about, I don't know, I suppose about anywhere between 6 to 8 million a year in revenue. And they've kind of said that, like, once you cross that threshold, let's just call it 8 to 10, you need like 2 to 3 more people, or 20 to 40% more overhead. It's not until you get to like 15 to 20 million that you become efficient again. And like, I'm not sure I'm ready to go to double size, and so I keep on bumping against this wall, and I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how to get through it, or if I should. That's where I war with myself. And I don't know, like, hey, don't get too big for your britches. Like, a couple homes, you're doing great. Like, just stay in your lane, do what you're doing, and just keep doing it better. Like, that might be the answer, and that might be simpler. That might be better. And so that's where I struggle with that.
I think that if you are going about things the way that you are, right, it's been a very organic transition, organic growth for you. You've gotten the customers that have come to you, you built the business that you're meant to have right now. You haven't forced anything. So I think that you'll get there, and you'll have a tight team, and you won't overbuild. And I think that you'll still, if you're profitable now, you'll remain profitable as you grow, because you're not going to get a job and then scale up to fit that job. But if you are looking to make a very strong, deliberate change, and you're changing the internal structure of your business to be able to do a higher caliber of job or just more sales volume, I think that you're going to end up having that struggle of trying. It's just a very immediate change, and you went from working and understanding your target customer and volume to now something that's completely different, and you're kind of working backwards. I think Nick did that for a few years, right? He wanted to grow, and he made it happen very quickly, but he didn't know how to do that once he got there. So now he's like, he has all the work on his plate, and he's now working backwards to try and figure out, how do I run a business of this scale and this caliber, rather than it taking Nick 10 years and learning a little bit on each job. It was probably larger lessons with less of a break in between them. So it's how much you want to push the envelope, and how quickly you want to get there. I mean, Nick could probably elaborate on that a little bit more than myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that's the constant struggle. And I was talking to Ken about this as well, like with materia millwork, where it's like we constantly come up against the fact that we need more people to take on more responsibility so we can delegate, but then we need more work. And it's like, and it's this back and forth of like, how much more work do I want to take on versus do I just buckle down and take on more responsibility myself? And it's like, I can't grow unless I delegate. And it's like, well, I can't delegate until I have another person. It's like everyone that works for me currently is, quote unquote, overwhelmed. And I'm not saying that like I don't believe them. I'm saying that like as they've communicated that to me. Mark, we're a team of, I want to say we're closer to 15 right now, and we do the same revenue. And it's like, so we're 3 times the amount of people doing the same amount of revenue. So when I hear that, it's like, man, like what are we doing? Why do we require so many more people? And frankly, we have self-performing carpentry, which we can, write off. And we probably manage our jobs a little bit differently, which is all fine. But when you break it down, it's like, should I have less people? Or should I be doing 3 times the amount of volume? And this is where, I go in this constant, like, that's why I've been quiet for the last couple of minutes. I'm just sitting here thinking, and it's like, we're making this massive leap in this year too, into these really high end, quote unquote, spec builds. And I'm super excited about it, but I'd be lying if I wasn't getting text messages right now that aren't super comfortable. where it's like, they're like, this needs my attention. I'm like, I'll talk to you after the podcast. But, it's like, well, this is really important in order for us to make this work. I'm like, I get it. And
I mean, I know I don't know that much about motorbikes. I had a motorcycle for a little while, but I know Tyler, you're big into. It's a little bit like that two-stroke, and I mean that throttle is it's so hairline, and I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like, and I understand enough about business and just life. Like you're always seeking balance, and you might have it, for 2 seconds, and then you're off, and those 2 seconds are like, ah, and then
Mhm.
you're right back into a hot mess. And if anything, this world of, I feel like the last year my life has exploded in terms of contacts and outside my state and relationships with like the both of you and these podcasts and just the contractor coalition is just the friendships that you make there, and just I feel like I had so much stimulus and so many ideas, I can't stop them all, and
Mhm.
nor do I really want to. And so it's like, so you write all these ideas down, and you're like, well, how do I implement? There's not enough time to do even your core stuff, much less all this other stuff that you're
Yeah.
generating. And so it's like, I've thought about virtual assistants and
Mhm.
regular assistants, and like, do I need another project manager, another site manager? But I still believe that you still have to have some of the book of work in place ahead of time. Like I've run my business, and maybe it's to my detriment, but I've always been sort of debt averse. I've essentially run a cash business for 19 years. I've never, other than early on, I took a loan, for a spec home. But other than that, I've always been able to just run a cash business in the sense that I'm using the deposits to pay my overhead. And so I'm very uncomfortable taking on debt. But then I look at, some other builders that are doing branch off into commercial stuff, and they've had way bigger financial success because they've leveraged themselves. And so like now at 42, which I'm not young or old, I guess I'm just middle aged. And so it's like, young at heart, I guess. But I look around and you're like, and I don't really feel, I don't like, I'm a very competitive person athletically, but like I enjoy competing against myself. And so I don't want this to come off as like I am encouraged by the people above me and around me. Like, oh, I love what they're doing. That empowers me. Like I feel very
Mhm.
encouraged. I don't feel threatened by that at all. I only say that by like looking out, like, if I had made different choices, or if I can, I know Nick, you're really into interest, you're interested in like real estate and like, banking, and you've talked about, these different, and it's like, trying to devote that time into learning that, but it's a whole nother business. And I kind of go back to what that wise philosopher, AKA dad, told me a long time ago. He's like, if you're really good at something, like do that. Like
Yeah.
he goes, a lot of people I knew had careers where they were really good at building tires, and they decided to go build cars or motorcycles. Like, no, you're awesome at building tires, like build tires.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I continually war with myself of like, stay in your lane, do it really good. And not that you can't diversify and have some other interests that benefit you, but well, there's only so much time in the day. And so I don't know, this is a endless
No,
philosophical debate, but
you're right, and it's like, and that's where my mind has been at for the last few months, truthfully, where there's so many opportunities, there's so many things. I sat down this morning just to write down. I was like, I got to put a to-do list together, and I got to divide this up between, each company, the development stuff, the personal development stuff, like, and I started writing all this stuff down. I'm like, I can't even get this shit done. And recently, I'll have a thought in my mind. I'm like, okay, hold on, I gotta write that down. And then I'll grab a piece of paper and I will not remember it. And I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out what is causing that. Is it the fact that I'm getting older? Or is it the fact that I am stacking more and more shit on my plate that I just simply don't have, like, actually have the brain bandwidth in order for me to accomplish this stuff? And I'm with you. It's, I want to be there 100% for my family when I'm home. I want to dedicate that time. I do a pretty decent job about balancing work life, but I know that, I my business oftentimes overpowers that. Where it's like, I'll just check this email, I'll just get this done. Oh, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV with the kids on a Saturday. No, I don't want to sit on the couch. I might as well go get my computer and get work done. And again, I think that this is just like an airing out conversation at this point, but it's it is difficult because of, there's so much, as you said, stimulus of all these things going on and all these things you want to implement and all these things you want to be better at. And it's like, you know when does it stop, and when do you just kind of put your head down and focus on one thing and be really freaking good at it.
That's what I was gonna ask, and it would be applicable to both of you, is what's going to change if you get there? Like, is it the
Nothing, and I
thrill
think
of
I
the
know
hunt?
that.
Like, are you really gonna be happier? What imagine that you have everything that you want in business, it's gonna be something else. Something else is
100%.
g and, like, so for me, a lot of times those decisions and that angst that creates and that drive that you're trying to solve a problem that's not even a problem in the first place, and it's
Right.
like,
That's very wise, Solomon.
I mean, and the other thing is, like, what does your wife say about this? What does your dad say about this? There's gotta be other people within your circle
Mhm.
that have an opinion on this, where it's not just you inside your own head
Yeah.
just going insane about it.
Well, I guess unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not someone that thinks a lot about this, as I mentioned, because I tend to get my thinking out loud. So the people that are kind of in my small circle of, well, not small, I have a large circle, I guess, but anyone who will listen and pick up the phone and I talk to about this stuff, they essentially, they're sounding boards, right? As you're kind of playing out your ideas, but um, they don't want to kill the creativity. My dad used to always say, don't kill the Tigger. Like, there's a lot of energy and it's done a lot of good, but it's also hard to corral it sometimes. And I feel like sometimes just waiting and seeing where it goes and seeing what falls and what lands and, also finding what energizes you. And I think you bring up a really good point, like what changes. And you're right. If you do this, what part of your life changes? And so maybe, I mean, it's almost like a better thing. It's a little bit like accumulating, um, I think Michael Gutelli was on your deal, right? He had 240 pairs of Jordans. Like, I didn't ask him yet because I call him pretty regularly. It's like, I think he's down to 150. Like, at what point do you actually start eliminating things from your life that just
Mhm.
weigh you down? And I know, Nick, you're training for your marathon, but like, a little bit like akin to a bike, you could spend $20,000 on the highest end carbon fiber everything bike, and because it's 2 pounds lighter than another one, or you could lose 2 pounds of weight and save
Yeah.
10 grand. And so it's like, but going back to running, a lot of it is like weight just weighs you down. And like, if you're running with the vest, if you're running with the stuff, like it wears on you. My dad had a heart attack when he was 52. And I think there's some genetic markers there that are part of that. But I think a lot of it, he said it was stress.
Mhm.
It is stressful. And like, what are the plans to, obviously take care of your body, which has been a huge part of you guys' podcast over the last couple of months. And, it's pretty near and dear to me as well, both from athletics and sleep and just things that that are just going to make you feel better, much less make you live longer. Um, anyway, we've digressed all over the place at this point. But anyway, I guess what you're saying is, yeah, I think circling the wagons and running it by your people and saying, what do you want? That being said, my wife usually says less is more, and she's really helped me create boundaries. Like in the evening, like I'm done at 4:59. If you call me at 5 o'clock, I won't answer.
Mhm.
Unless it's a personal friend or something like that. And I've made that very clear to our clients. It's actually helped us win a few jobs. I think they almost like appreciate the fact that we understand. And I often use these lines like, hey, we're, like a dentist or a doctor. You don't call them at 9 o'clock at night, to get your teeth cleaned. Like, you're running a business that just happens to be where our business is building a home. That being said, if there's an emergency, obviously we'll be available. But, you try to train them in early. And I feel like my wife is really, because family time is really, we eat dinner every single night at 5:30. I mean, if I come in the door, Nick and I talked about this, if I come in the door at 5:01, oh boy,
Yeah.
that's no bueno. And so, I literally, because I'm an idiot, I have an alarm on my phone that rings every day at 4:20. So and I have another one at 4:30 if I miss that one. So I better be out the door. There better be an accident that I can prove on the way home that I was delayed. And not
That
that
doesn't
she's,
it doesn't even matter.
it does. You're right. Yeah.
It's like you should have planned for the accident.
Yep, that's true. You're 100% right. But again, this is, my wife is very reasonable. She's just say, "Will you please be home by 5?
Totally.
Because we want to have dinner at 5." And I agree with that. Like, I don't have
Mhm.
any issue with it. But I do love what I do. I mean, you're in the middle of it, you're in the groove, and you're like, I just got to get one more email, one more thing out, one more bid out, and you're like, oh man, it's 10 minutes to 5. Wow, I'm in trouble. And
Yeah.
so, anyway,
I mean, so
um,
much of that is self-serving though, don't you think? That like with your business and the growth and the challenge and the adrenaline that comes from that, like that's for you. That's not necessarily for you. We all act like it's for our customers or we're working for our family, but so much of that is serving yourself and nobody else. Like that drive.
I think I think it can be both. I think if I had to weigh that percentagely, I'd say 70% correct, 30% it could be to others, because it does help other people around you. Nick mentioned this, you guys talked about your own business practices of how it fulfills you. And, I think you had mentioned about Nick, just that, he likes a little bit of anxiety. And I would say, I do like multiple things going on. Like, I'm very stimulated by a lot going on. It maybe is maybe not what's best for me, but I am stimulated by it. And I think one thing for me, and even this conversation has helped to, maybe pare things down and clean them up a little bit, like really identify what you're really good at and just keep on improving on that. But I will say this, the podcast has completely re-energized me, and I'm energized as well, but it's like turbocharged me with 6 cans of Red Bull and a line of Coke, because it's like another business venture that's somewhat in parallel with building. But I really, for me, the podcast is really invigorating, because I want to celebrate for me, it was important that the podcast, I should just take a minute of what it is. Like, the podcast is about builders, architects, designers, anyone that owns a business in Minnesota. Like, it was important to me that all the interviews be in person, because I wanted just to be with people. And then 2, it was really important, like someone said, hey, if you're going to start a podcast, there's a lot of building podcasts. You guys have a phenomenal podcast, great listening. There's so many other ones out there that are so good. Like, how do you compete with those? And I wasn't even thinking about that. I just want to celebrate how great the craftsmanship is in Minnesota. And so, and I have a list of 200 people already. It's like, man, I need a couple more sponsors so that I can go weekly, because it's killing me that I've recorded 20 episodes and I've only aired, 10. This last Monday was our 10th episode. And it's just killing me, and I have so much good, ammunition in the tank to get out into the world. And I just can't, I love it. It's been so invigorating, and talking to these people. And it's a little bit like, I mean, I don't know if you ever get this way, but it's a little bit like whatever you're struggling with when you ask somebody on the podcast, it's almost like self-therapy. And so it's like these
100%.
podcasts are amazing, because you get so much, so much of what's on your mind. You get to, you're networking with other builders, and it doesn't even have to be builders, architects, designers, my cabinet guy, electrician, it doesn't matter. It's like business is so similar. And there's just that small difference maker in your specialty that changes it. But the rest of it is very, very similar. Like, most people should be able to relate to what we're talking about today, because it's not that focused exactly on the nuances of, 2x4 construction, or, whatever you're insulating. That's not even my skill set. So can't talk about that much anyway.
You said that you had never listened to a podcast until around 6 months ago. And then all of a sudden you started a podcast.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah. Good question. Oh, that's funny. Ian, my producer, because I'm recording in my studio, just walked by. He's laughing because he also wants to know the answer to this. So I was on Brad Levitt's podcast for AFT Construction after the coalition, and halfway through, I'm like, this is amazing. This is so fun. I just love it. You just get to talk about building and business, and I just love hanging around. I mean, Nick can tell you, I sat in the front row, and I continually had my hand up the entire coalition. Yep. And anyway, so I'm like, this is great. You can, it didn't even dawn on me that, if you were successful, you could actually, get sponsors. I was just like, I just want to talk to people on air. I love this. And I'm not somebody who's shy. And I guess going back to my communication background is like, I am fine being on stage. I am fine presenting to people. And I know a lot of people aren't. And so I'm like, well, that's something I could probably leverage. I love my parade homes when people can come and talk to me in person. So I thought, well, this is another way where we can maybe go and celebrate others. So it was like celebrating stories. So within 30 days, I was like, well, I'm just going to start one. And I'm not someone, as you already know, I started building a house without knowing what I was doing. I started a podcast without knowing what I was doing. And evidently I'm definitely someone, well, I know you can business plan. I think, Tyler, you brought this up on a few podcasts ago. I mean, you can business plan yourself to death. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do a business plan. It just isn't what I do. I'm not this real analytical, I'm not going to build a house without a building plan, for an analogy here. But from a business standpoint, like, I do really well with inertia. And it's like, that's my idea. That's what I'm going to do. I don't need people to tell me whether they like it or not. I'll listen to people for sure, and I'll get their input. Like, I listened to you, Tyler. Like, that was a great input that you gave me, and I'll use it. But I'm like, I'm going, and I'll figure out on the way. And I don't know, it served me pretty well. And we'll see, I guess. But anyway, the point was, that was it. So I started pre-recording. I took, you guys were, I had no idea about costs or any of that. I didn't lay out a business plan. I had no idea what it even cost. I just said, I'm going to do it. I got 5-6 people.
Didn't you learn anything from us? This is not the way to do it.
I wasn't listening to you at that time.
I guess not.
And so, so I listened obviously to 2 episodes of Brad before I was on his. Then I listened to Jocko's a little bit, but I have a little bit of like Nick, I have a little bit of obsessive personality, which is why I like book tapes and I like movies. I don't like series, because if I was to get in on like for instance, Jocko's on like what 400th episode or something. I was like, man, I can't listen to him because I got to go back to the beginning, and listen to all of them. And it's even like Game of Thrones. Like I don't have a TV, and which explains what's wrong with me. And I grew up without one. But when Game of Thrones was I like to read books, and so I saw Game of Thrones was like getting close to the 8th season. I'm like, man, everyone's talking about this, and I love fantasy and sci-fi, and so I'm like, it's like Lord of the Rings. Like, am I really going to be the guy who didn't read Lord of the Rings? And I'm like, fine. So I started reading the books, and I got close to the 8th season. I'm like, fine. So I went online, I subscribed to HBO, and I just absolutely crushed 7 seasons. And I think about 3 months of crazy lifestyle habits. I mean, literally, the kids would go to sleep, my wife would go to sleep, I'd work out, and I would just watch, like, just crush episodes. But that's exactly why I don't have a TV and why I don't get into series, is because once I get in, I can't stop. Anyway, so yeah, so I did not listen to you because I wasn't even listening to you. So I guess I have an excuse.
So sponsors came after the fact, right? So you have a few.
No, I did everything. I went out, got a bunch of sponsors before I even had a podcast, which frankly was the most enjoyable part. I would go to people and be like, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. It's called." For some reason, I knew exactly what I wanted to name it. It just happened to be that I was renaming not rename. I actually looked into renaming the company last July because the idea was, it seems silly to me that as Mark D. Williams Custom Homes, that 20 years from now, let's say, if I sell the business, like, well, can I even sell the business? Is my name, I don't necessarily, do I have a process that I can sell? I don't own land. So how can I sell my business? And so I explored, like, I can't remember the names off the top of my head, like Aspen Builders or whatever name I would have named it had I thought about it ahead of time. So I went through this whole exploratory thing. And after a couple of months of working with this company and they came up with some great names, I just couldn't give up the name. And it's like, I talked to someone that I had known myself, obviously my grandpa and my dad, and like, hey, you have a great last name. Like, everyone, knows you build quality homes. Like, why are you giving up that name? You just won Builder of the Year and now you can change your name. That's crazy. And he's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good point. So we rebranded, not renamed. And it was right at that point in time I was on the podcast. I'm like, I'm starting a podcast. So I just told the people who were helping me rebrand everything, like, oh, by the way, why don't you add some additional scope of work? We're starting a podcast and a whole other business. And so that all came about right at the same time. So then I had the logo that you can see right now, and I had some other, mock-ups and graphic stuff. And I went to, people that I work with, and I said, hey, I'm starting a podcast. I knew what I wanted to do. It was in person with Minnesota. It was very Minnesota based. And I said, and they're like, how many people are listening to you? I'm like, 0. And like, who's your target audience? I'm like, unknown. And like, who else has sponsored you? Like, nobody. Like, all right, sign us up. And so, that seemed to work. All right. So we've got about 8 or 9 sponsors now. And I'm really excited about live events. So I went to a live event, actually Jordan's live event, and I sat in the front row. I think I was the only guy there in Lululemon in the studio, and and they were amazing, and they made fun of me quite a bit for being in the front row, but that's fine. I'm a glutton for punishment. And anyway, I'm like, this is amazing. The people do live events. So now I'm gonna try to do 3 live events this year, and we'll see where it goes.
So as far as going to sponsors, essentially, is it, I'll take whatever you're willing to give me, or are you going to them with an ask?
I worked up a marketing sheet that basically said main sponsorship level was 15,000. A mini season sponsorship was 5,000 or 7,500. I can't remember now. And then 1,500 for a single episode. And I left the low one in there because I wanted to give, if one of my trade partners wanted to do a single episode because they wanted to support it, but they didn't have the money to like really make, because I've tried to talk people actually out of that 1,500 because I'm like, hey, XYZ company, I don't feel like this is a good investment. Like, if you really want this to be a good investment, I need to give you more airtime. I need to do videos for you. I can't do that for 1,500.
Yeah.
But I've had probably 3 people still want to do it because they want to support me. And it's humbling, it's gratifying, it's encouraging, it's all of those things kind of mixed in this potent cocktail of just validation of like, people want to hear people's stories. And so a big shout out to our main sponsors that kind of picked up the right away. And once you have a few sponsors, it's like, oh, well, they're doing it. And that's where you came in really helpful, Tyler, that you kind of unknowingly helped me write that business plan, because I put like, hey, I'm going to do a 10-second ad read. I'm going to do a 30-second ad read. If you're a season sponsor, I'll do 4, reels or videos on our website, on our Instagram, on our LinkedIn, and all these different social channels. And then, and they don't even know about these live events because, none of them are in the books yet. We just found a date here today. So we'll start, working on some promo stuff for that. So now it's going back to them because, we're quickly running out of funding, and I need to get some bigger ticket sponsors to either help sponsor these live events, or we need to pick up some more more sponsors, because I really want to go weekly. Right now we're bi-weekly, and we just.
And is that just you need compensation to devote the time and resources to it?
No, I have the time and I have the resources. It's really been the marketing side of things that it's the money to actually produce it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted the podcast to fit the same branding quality as the rebrand that I had for the custom home. So I wanted everything in person. I knew the audio would be outstanding. I didn't want any Zoom call drops. And I know you guys probably have more experience with this than I do. I know a lot of people have started podcasts, just buying a microphone and just doing it. But I knew what I was good at. I don't want to do any editing. I didn't want to do any posting. I didn't want anything technical. That's just not what I'm good at, nor am I interested in it. I just want to interview people and ask questions and just listen to people and give my 100% attention to them. And it was funny, actually, because I've talked a lot about my wife on this podcast, but it's when I told her I was starting a podcast, her first response, as you can imagine, she goes, you have to listen to people, right, honey? And so I've often joked when I have people on the podcast that this is my form of marriage therapy. So I have gotten better at listening, but I mean, frankly, I just get super curious about people. And I've obviously have, even in the 10 episodes or 20 episodes, I guess 10 that aren't published, that I've learned a lot, even from now to my first episode. It's not even comparison at how much I've learned in just that short time of how to prep for an interview. And while I'm much better at ad-libbing and then I can't go off a script, I feel that the homework that you do on the front end sets you up to be successful, so you can ad-lib and kind of go where the conversation goes. But if you don't have that, it's a little bit like a cheat sheet in high school. Remember when you could write we used to be able to do like a 3.5 and 11 by card, or no, sorry, 3x5 card, write as much information on both sides as you want. But then you never used it during the test because you memorized it.
Yeah.
And the joke was on you. And but anyway, I think that's a little bit like preparing for a podcast.
So what's the value pitch that you were going to your sponsors with, right? How are you serving your sponsors and bringing value to them? Because like you said earlier, it's got to be a relationship, right? It can't just be, hey, you're going to get an ad read. You're going to get, like, what does that conversation look like for you to really stabilize and I guess strengthen that relationship with your sponsors?
Are you saying what was it in the beginning? What is it
What
now?
what is
or
it
what do I
now?
want
Like,
it to be?
yeah, so what is it now, and what do you want it to be? Like, what's the pitch there? Because I know when we go to sponsors, it's not, hey, we're looking for funding right now. Obviously, that's part of it, but it's having a conversation with them as to how we can have a mutually beneficial relationship. And with the structure of your podcast and where it's heading, what's your value that you're hoping to provide your sponsors with?
That's a good question. I think it kind of evolves a little bit, but I guess I started with saying, well, I guess I should say now what it is versus what it was, because before I didn't know what it would become. So what it is now is essentially I know who's listening. It's 70% people in Minnesota. I think our audience nationwide is growing just because some of my friends now are across the country, and I think their platforms are leading people to listen to it. But locally, it's no other builders doing this in our state. To the level that we are. There are a few others, but nobody's putting the kind of money or professionalism, or not to put them down. It's just I'm spending a significant amount of money and time to make this. I want it to be first class. I want it to be really good. I want it to also complement our brand, and for the building side. But I also think that this is something I would do when I retire. That I'm having this much fun doing it. Like, I actually want to branch out to other businesses. Right now I want to stay core, like just building in Minnesota. Not that I won't take on other builders. Like, I've had Brad on, I'd have you guys on, of course. But the point of it is like, I could see myself just being any business owner in Minnesota. Cause frankly, I'm just interested in how you, on your stories. I didn't realize how excited I was about hearing people's stories. So back to the question of like, what value can I bring? I think the real value right now is staying in my lane, which is staying business centric. I had a few people lined up, and then the more I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? They're not really in building. It's a bit of a stretch to have XYZ company on. So while they're talking about business, I've even heard from DMs and people saying like, hey, could you bring on, you celebrate, you have a lot of these, big fish, if you will, but could you bring on, a smaller remodeler, or could you bring on, maybe a trim carpenter, or they want to hear different details. And so I'll respond to that. And so the value, I think, to let's say like Pella, for instance, or Monoman Reson Timbers, or these people that are our sponsors now, like they know, like in Minnesota, like I build really nice homes. We have show homes, we have tour homes, and the public comes to them, but also other builders and architects are listening to the show, which I don't think a lot of my clients, and maybe this is a good question to you, I don't know of any of my clients that are listening to my podcast. I shouldn't say two of them are, but I'm already building for them. I didn't get them from the podcast. And so they listen to it to, I guess, understand it deeper. But the people that are listening to the podcast are my trade partners. They're my architects. They are other designers. And so we're becoming a source of information, which is really valuable to the sponsor. So if you're Pella Windows and I'm having other builders on, and everyone listens to their own episode at least once. And so it's like, that's a great way to get in front of them. I have a landscaper who's very talented and has not done a lot of work with other builders. And he told me as a mini sponsor, because I'm always kind of surprised at some of and I was really flattered that Eric from NRD Landscaping wanted to be a sponsor of the Curious Builder podcast. And I said, oh, what can I do for you? And he's like, I would really like to be. And so part of my mini season is they get 5 episodes. Versus, the first year if we're going to be 25, so they get a quarter of them. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll put your ad reads and your video only on builder interviews, knowing that that's who you want to work with. So I will then put your ad read on a builder's podcast, knowing that builder will listen to his own podcast and it'll be another way to reinforce it. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but answering your question, I'm going to them and saying, what do you want? How about an idea that you think? And the trade partners have just been absolutely super thrilled with how it's gone. I think it's too early to know if that ROI has come back for them at this point, but I definitely want to kill it for them one way or another. And so I think the live events is going to be another step forward, and we'll see where that goes.
No, and I think what's important, there's 2 vantage points with this. One, when you start getting bigger, higher dollar sponsors and they want to see the analytics behind it. But I think that the better approach is more of one that you are taking where it's less transactional and more relationship based, where you'll get into contracts and deliverables, but having a working relationship with a partner where anything that comes up, hey, if you need something posted, if you need us to spread the word about an event that we're not, JLC or whatever it may be, maintaining those relationships and helping in one hand washes the other. And it's much less transactional. And it's just like the collaboration with your subs or with architects or with designers. And now you build and establish this network and these relationships with these partners that it helps your career and it helps their business for more than just a podcast read. And that was always the struggle for me. And I believe this was what we were having a conversation about at BizCom, that I don't see the value in just pitching a company on an ad read on a podcast. It doesn't make it, there's no gratification there for me. I would rather have a relationship where it's like, hey, how can we help you? What can we do for you? How can we work together to better the industry? And even with Andersen right now, what they're doing and what they're putting towards this entire project and what they're concerned with is important to us and the trades and the next generation and everything else. So it's less about, hey, let's get an ad read on the podcast and how can we work together to create content and a podcast that's going to make a huge difference in this industry. And I think if you're able to develop and maintain those relationships with your partners and with your sponsors, that it will continue to be less transactional and more of a relationship. And I think that the true value lies in that for me, more so than, hey, here's a 10-second read at the end of the podcast that everyone's going to fast forward through. Yep. For me, that doesn't make sense. So I think that you're on that road, and I think that it is important to keep moving in that direction and less the direction of, hey, what do your analytics look like? How many people are going to see this? Because a lot of what we put out and what gets posted to my Instagram and Nick's Instagram and personal and page and conversations that we have with people, it's far more expansive than what you see from a screenshot of my Instagram analytics. And I think that if you're able to prove that to your sponsors, that you can make a little bit more money and provide more value to them.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And you touched on some of the things, obviously you told me in a much shorter amount of time when we chatted at BizCom. I think, for instance, do you keep lists? And Nick, maybe you do this too, but like, because I don't, I just had this idea while you're thinking, like, I mean, obviously I know who my sponsors are. We don't have that many that I can't remember them, but like, do you like, there's obviously your existing sponsors. There's, for you guys, you probably have past sponsors. There's all kinds of relationships. Do you keep like email lists or like almost like email groups where you could like fire off like, hey, some branded contents like, hey, we're doing this event, or how do you galvanize some of that, or is each one on an individual basis?
I think individual works best just from a authenticity standpoint, where
Yeah,
it's like, hey, we have something coming up. This is something that we'd like to include you with. Or here's an opportunity that we feel you're a good fit for, less than just pumping something out where it's like, let's shoot at the ball and see what sticks. And I think that's the same principle that I'm speaking to, where it's like you're having individual relationships with each and every one of these partners. And each of those relationships are independent of each other and unique. So not that that's a terrible idea, and I think maintaining those point of contacts and relationships with people is great, but it should be a personal experience as well.
I agree, and I think you could do both. I mean, part of it is like I'm trying to think of like how I can offload this. Like, I like to time block in my schedule, and so it's like I have set certain times aside to work solely on podcast sponsorships. Outside of recording and any of that stuff or research. And so part of me says like it just happened to cross my mind on the way here because I did a little film video with Chelsea Lopez, who and so, we were shooting some beams that were going up in a home, and I was just doing some tutorial stuff. And as I was driving, I was like, since I had just touched the beams, and Sarah from Minoman Reson Timber, one of our main season sponsors, I called her because her episode just aired yesterday. And I just said, hey, what did you think of your episode? So, but it was very organic. And my point is like that thought just happened to cross my mind because I happened to go see her beams. And also it was on my mind because I always listen to the podcasts the day that it releases. I mean, my routine is essentially I listen, early in the morning, I'll be working out. So I'll listen to mine, I'll listen to Brad's, and then I'll listen to yours because your 2-hour segment, I want to make sure I get them through. I usually get through all my podcasts by early Tuesday, and then the rest is audiobooks. And I only bring that up for anyone that's interested in how you time block or how I do it anyway. And, but if I only was to trust my memory to call Sarah, is that effective, or should I actually have a plan to like time block and say, call these 8 sponsors, almost like a CRM, database for your home clients? Do you have a CRM database to like recycle it up or reoccurring schedule somehow to touch base with your sponsors, or do you just let it happen to be, when it comes across your mind?
I think the goal for us, we do not. And we do have people in place right now that handle a lot of that day-to-day, if need be, contact. But the way that I approach that, and Nick may be different, is each sponsor, it depends if it's a relationship that I had that I initially made the point of contact, I'll individually reach out to them and say, hey, just want to touch base. Is everything good? Are you feeling good with the direction of things? Is there any changes that you want to make? And then I rely on Doug, Catherine, and Ariana to handle a lot of the daily communication, or if there's something that needs to be done, getting ad reads. But I do like to have those touch points with them personally. I don't necessarily have a calendar alert, and it's not something that comes up that I'm constantly reminded of. But it's probably not a terrible idea, once a week, once a month, just to, I guess, put some thought to how things are going and touch base with your sponsors. I don't feel that the relationship with the sponsors is that different than the relationship with your customers, the relationship with your subs, the relationship with architects, and everything else. And I think that if you treat it that way, obviously you have a successful business, you have people who work for you, who continue to work for you. And I think that if you approach your relationship with your podcast guests, your listenership, and your sponsors the same way that you treat everyone within your business, that that crossover is going to make sense, and you're going to have a successful podcast.
It's funny. I just had 3 ideas. I'm like looking around. It's like I only have a computer, and it's like I got to write these down so I don't forget them. But I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, I was just gonna tell you what the idea was.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the idea was just simply, it sounds simple, but everyone loves a handwritten note, and I tried every Friday to do 2 handwritten thank yous to anyone that has just done a great job. But part of it is that I haven't thought about treating my guests, who obviously I think, of course, for their time, and we're very involved with them when they're on. But even now, it kind of makes me actually right now, because we've only had 10 episodes. So if you're obsessive compulsive out there and you want to get in early before it gets too many numbers, you only have 10 to make up. But anyway, I was going to do like a 10, like a highlight reel of the top 10, because we only have 10, so that's easy. And it's like sports letter 10. And but anyway, this idea that how often would you send them a thank you letter, or I'm going to develop some obviously whatever hats I do for MDW, I'm going to do for the Curious Builder. And so the idea would be I'd probably give each guest a thank you. And we're going to do a boat cruise in August. We just sent out a thank you or a save the date on Lake Minnetonka, which is this really nice lake here. And so we're going to do dinner and a 3-hour boat cruise around the lake looking at homes. And anyone that's been on the podcast or a sponsor is going to be invited. And that's the only way to get on that.
Damn, we better get on the podcast soon, Nick.
We got an invite going. So bring it on home. You guys need to come. Then you got to come back twice. Unless you want to interview the day we do the boat cruise. That can be arranged.
We could do it.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, what was your idea, Nick?
No, I was gonna bring this back to our earlier conversation. It's like we went down this rabbit hole of the podcast and how you're like quite literally executing it. But this goes back to the question as to, is this too much? Are you doing too much? Is your attention being peeled away? And it's a question I ask myself too, right? Where it's like, there are so many ideas. Forever I have a stack of note cards in front of me, and every Friday I did the same thing. I would write a thank you note, a handwritten thank you note to anyone I talked to that week.
Oh wow, that's a lot.
And I was doing it to, like, if I went and saw a new job, I would thank you for, like, hey, thanks for considering us as a bit, like, to someone I might have a Zoom call with, to a guest and I was like, I'm doing this. This is awesome. And it stuck for like 4 weeks, and then it trickled off. And then someone was like, hey, you didn't send me a card. Right. And I was like, all right. And it's like, it's this ebb and flow, right?
Right.
But, but the podcast, it's like what you're doing, looking to ramp it up and have all this other stuff, I guess point blank, like, are you concerned, or what is your concern level of this impacting what you would consider your number one priority in business would be building homes?
That thought has never occurred to me. No.
Me neither.
Gotcha, Tyler. That's a very good point. I think it's going to supercharge Mark D. Williams Custom Homes. I think it might take a little time, 6 months to a year, but I am somebody that gains a lot of energy from collaboration and from I might partner with somebody to do some stuff. I've talked to a few local people. Do I hire more people? I think that's where I'm trying to figure out the balance. And so it's so new that I'm still, literally every week I'm coming up with a new idea to my producer, and he is a rock star. Shout out to Ian from Studio Americana. The guy is a legend. And so, this green screen, all the cameras, he was just solid audio. He just crushes audio. And I was like, well, the future is video, and I want a lot of video. And I'm looking, I should send you a video after this. I've got like 10 cameras pointed at me. And I was like, well, I was watching Rogan the other day, and they have a camera like right on their face. Could I have one of those? And he's like, yeah, that's like a $200,000 camera that's like floating around. I'm like, yeah, but I want it. So anyway, where I'm going with this is I don't know how it's going to impact the business, other than I think it's going to increase business, but I'm getting so much fulfillment out of it. It feels so good, but you also have to make sure that it's, putting food on the table right now. I've talked to a few other podcasters. When they first start, they're like, hey, you're doing a great job of doing sponsors. I'd never had any sponsors to start. And so that part's good. But that being said, your overhead's a lot more than mine was as well. And so like everyone's kind of said, if you can break even that first year, like, wow, that's amazing. So I guess I'd turn this question back on you, is like, how have you navigated, NS Builders and the Modern Craftsman, and how do you balance the two, and where do you feel fulfilled? And do you feel like it, you guys have done this now for what, 4 or 5 years?
I think we just passed 6.
Oh my word. So I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, preach. I mean, what do I need to do, and how have you navigated those waters?
I mean, truthfully, I don't think we have the answer. I think that it's, Tyler and I, we talk offline a lot about what is the greater purpose of Modern Craftsman. What is the greater purpose of what we're doing? Forever it was just a podcast. And I say that, not in the sense that it was nothing special. It certainly is. There's been a tremendous amount of work put into this and time from people that aren't even, sitting here on the podcast right now. But ultimately, I think, Tyler and I share and Tyler, you can speak to it, but I think that for me, the podcast is like my priority too, in the sense that when I'm no longer around, I want to have improved this industry, and and been an advocate for making the industry a better place and a better career path. And for the reasons, and that's really the reason that I do this and I do the podcast. Selfishly and very high priority on the number one priority is I want to build badass homes. I want to build the craziest shit that people tell me I can't build. And that's, and that's where the anxiety comes, right? Is that I do stuff that, 10 people tell me no, and one person's crazy enough to think that I can do it. And that's as much fuel as I need to get
Right.
the car running. But the podcast is very different in the sense that while I do think it will supercharge, my brand in some way, ultimately it's for me to, leave a little mark on the industry as, someone that helped advocate for the trades.
For me, if you want the honest truth, let's have real talk now, Mark.
Oh, have we
Mark
not
P.
been doing
Williams.
real talk? I thought we've been
this is
doing.
real talk.
Let's go.
So for years there were 3 of us on the podcast. It didn't necessarily have a cohesive identity. My personality, like we discussed early on, I was somewhat in the background. I didn't have much stake, much ownership into it. It was kind of showing up for the podcast for a long time, and it became 3 years into it, 2 years into it, when that pink cloud that you're on, when it's very exciting, is less prevalent, and it becomes more monotonous. It became difficult, and it became laborious and redundant, and I wasn't necessarily putting the required amount of time, setting the required amount of time aside for the podcast. It was rolling in the door if we were recording at 3 at 2:55, telling everyone, "Hey, we're setting up," and it was very last minute. And when we made a shift, and I was required to have more stake in this to make it happen and to sustain, it's just like anything that you do. You want to see it grow. You have more skin in the game. You're closer to it, and I've been fairly determined to devote at least a full day of my week to the podcast every week. And that requires me not to be on the job. And I've switched things within my business, and I've found it to be far more gratifying. I don't necessarily dread coming in on Tuesdays. Before it was, hey, I have to leave work early on Tuesdays to get to the podcast. So podcast was always a secondary priority. And now that I prioritize the podcast and I'm doing my due diligence and learning more about the guest and having an educated conversation with the guest, it's far more engaging, it's far more intriguing, and we're seeing the benefits and reaping the rewards of that, not even from a financial perspective, but just from listenership and the interaction and the engagement and our relationships with sponsors. So for me, there's obviously, you want a financial return on things, but I think that if it is enriching your life as a person and it's not creating issues within your household and it's bettering you as a person, I don't know if I would focus right now on the monetary side of things. Don't put yourself in a hole. But if it's something that you feel is making you a better human being, I would roll with that and see where it takes you.
I mean, that's great advice. But so, okay, let me ask you this. Let's say I don't know the exact numbers. Let's just call it 25,000. Let's say I'm able to break even if I keep, every other week. If I was to say it's going to cost me another 25 grand to go weekly and I don't have a sponsor now, there's a part of me that's like, hey, I'm 2 sponsors away or a sponsor and a half and I'm going. Or do I know I already have all the bullets in the gun of information, if you will, and I'm ready to go? Do I just go? But that's going to cost me 25 grand unless I have sponsorships to bring it in. So I'll be running it at a deficit. So to put your theory to the test, how would you respond to that then?
It
Because it is
depends.
fulfilling. And I do feel like we're lifting up the industry. And so many people have reached out to us. And one of the things I'm going to go into at some point is, our local government support from the Builders Association. It's called Minnesota Housing First. There's going to be a huge shift in trying to get certifications to people coming out of high school but don't want to go to college and trying to do these work programs. I'm super into that and trying to help support that. And I'm going to do whatever I can to help uplift that entire industry as well as my own. And it's not self-serving because, I mean, it sort of is because I'm in building and labor is going to be a major issue for my entire career. But I also just believe in the concept of I work with local high schools and like, how can I take what I have in connections that I have and then uplift the entire industry, like what Nick is saying. I feel very passionate about that. But you do need a voice. You do need to be financially solvent to do some of those things. So anyway.
What do you want to do? Nick and I have yet to pull a single dollar out of our podcast for ourselves to date. We have never paid ourselves for our podcast. So
that part would be fine, but you still have to cover production.
Yeah, but to be 5 years into something and devote as much time as we do and not have put a single dollar in our bank account, that's 5 years, 6 years worth of time that we could have devoted to something else. So there's a financial, a potential loss there. So I think it comes down to, again, how this serves you, how it serves your community. And if you believe in service work and that's something that's valuable to you, ideally, we've made a shift to make this podcast more profitable. And a lot of that was on our end and dropping the ball, but it was just never a priority for us. We were doing it for other reasons. But I think if it's worth it to you, you will find a way to cover those costs or establish those relationships. So I don't think that I would allow that to be a massive barrier to continuing along the path that you are if it's serving you and your community in the way that you say that it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful feedback. Interesting. I'll have to give that some more thought. I mean, so let me ask you this question. I mean, from what I can tell, and I guess I could speak to Nick because I know him slightly better than you, Tyler, but like, I think Nick runs an amazing business. I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge financially. I mean, the stuff that you cover, Nick, like you really know your stuff. Can it be both? Can't you run a profitable business and have it serve your intellectual needs? And if so, I mean, you guys certainly seem set up to do that. I mean, why would you not have done that? Like what, I mean, a healthy business is nothing to be,
no, you're absolutely right. And I don't think that's what Tyler is getting at. I think the point is that it just ended up not being a priority for us. Where, Tyler and I, and, we always knew that we wanted to benefit from this in some way, it's especially financially, like we devote that amount of time. And Tyler, I don't think like you've never really said that out loud. Like, hey, we've been doing this for, 2 hours every single week for 5 years. And when you think about that, it's like, man, anything else you devoted 2 hours,
the 2 hours of just sitting in front of the computer,
right?
That's
and it's
nothing
like,
else related to
to
it.
think that like what you could have done with that time financially is pretty bonkers. But yeah, Mark, I'm with you, and I think that a profitable business should be a priority, and I think that it's one mindset to take to kind of throttle it so you don't go into a deficit. And I don't think I don't think either side is right nor wrong. It's just for us, it was just something that we were doing, and we were like, whatever, we're not making any money. It's like we'll reap the benefit on the back end. But the reality is like if we rewinded and did all this over again, like we probably would be incredibly, in a much different position financially. We probably would have, explored sponsorships earlier on and created a more financially stable podcast. I say that like we're tipping over.
You're in a van down by the river.
No, but like we've never pulled money out of it, so it's in an account, and it pays for the people who are working for us, and there's money there, and it pays for expenses, and the podcast supports itself. But we never did it with the intent of making money, and to this day, we haven't done it with that being our priority. This isn't a source of income for either one of us.
To be fair, I didn't even know you could make money. I mean, so that wasn't why I started it.
Exactly.
I mean, I've kind of discovered that you could, and I was like, well, okay, if you can, why wouldn't you? And so
Totally.
I'm still learning. I mean, I'm only 10 episodes in, 20 recorded. I mean, I'm definitely learning, from you. I'm learning from peers in the industry, and a lot of it is just creativity and ingenuity. Like, what can I figure out? Like, out of curiosity, have you guys done live shows? Have you talked about doing live shows?
We have, but so what it comes down to is just how many balls we have in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And we've realized that we had Nick more than myself, but we have a lot going on, just like you, with family and business, and where our priorities are, and what amount of time we have, and where it's best served. And I think that right now we're finally getting everything going with the podcast and legitimizing everything and putting people in place to make this run like a business, which is so crazy because we're on a podcast speaking about the importance of business,
Right.
and we didn't have time to stop and put things in place, but we didn't want to stop putting out a podcast. So if you think about your position, right, it's going to cost you 25 grand for the first year. That's a $25,000 investment in a business. Most businesses are not making a profit in their first year in business. Most businesses aren't making a profit for a long time in business. So in order to start a business, it requires an investment, and it's up to you to figure out how to offset that and hopefully make a profit on that investment. But there's nobody who's ever started a business who has let that basically been able to start a business with cash, no investment, and not have any sort of risk in there. And I think that that's just part of starting a business, right? And
Yep.
I understand you've ran a cash business, I've ran a cash business, but there was still money and investment of my time that I had to put out to be profitable. So I think that it's serving you in a way that I would move ahead with things, continue to produce as much as you can. Don't put yourself in a financial liability or risk, but then find a way to cover those costs. And I think that long term, it's going to reward you. And maybe you don't get rich from it, but I think that if it creates a network, if you get one job from it, like you're done.
Yeah,
You covered the
right.
cost of your
Right. I mean,
podcast for the year,
Yep. And I think, and to your point, in the years past, for a smaller company, and this will be interesting to see what Jordan says after she does kind of a financial audit of us. Like, I think percentage wise, we probably spend more money on marketing than people tell you should. And I do think tracking your ROI is so difficult. Like on print, it's so hard. And so it's like, I tend to be someone, if I really like something, I just do it.
Yeah.
And, and that's just my personality. And that's how I started the podcast that way, I guess. And so, part of it is understanding, like, I've dialed back a lot of my marketing because it's on my essentially marketing has gone into the Curious Builder podcast. Now I've set up a separate business and it's a complete separate entity because my plans long term is, if I could sell Mark T. Williams custom homes, 15, 20 years from now, I would potentially continue to keep the Curious Builder because I'm just very curious. And I know I could, continue to do that for a long period of time. And, maybe I do consulting, or maybe you do, who knows what the future holds. But I definitely think the Curious Builder would be a part of it. So I wanted to set it up from the very beginning so that it could live beyond Mark D. Williams custom homes, even though right now they're very intertwined.
Yeah. I mean, as an outside perspective and an outside point of view, you're doing all things the right way.
Well, thank you.
You've set up the podcast the right way. You're looking to line sponsors up. I Nick and myself possibly there was 3 people involved, different locations, everyone at a different point in their life. There was just to get 3 people on a phone call and all make a decision based on something, and then to have to make 15, 20 decisions a week based on a podcast, just decisions weren't ever made, and everyone just went with the flow, and it was really, really difficult. And then we were going, and it was too late to turn back, and we didn't want to turn back. So we're now at the point that you are just starting off, and it would have behooved us to do that from day one, but we also didn't know where it was going to go. There weren't a lot of podcasts back then, and if looking back on all of this, and if somebody were to tell you, hey, you're going to do this for 5 years and you're not going to ever pull money out of it, I'd still do it again, because the network and the relationship and how it has benefited my business, and the lessons that I've been learned, and the contacts that and the relationships that we've developed are worth all of that time.
Yeah.
So again, I think that it's more, you can't always look at every decision in your life and business as a transactional business decision.
And I rarely do, but sometimes I wonder if that's to a fault, because it's a relationship thing. But, you're essentially encouraging me to continue to be what I guess I've always been, which is, well, we'll quote our friend here, chase experience, not dollars, which he said on every episode he's ever recorded. But it's so true.
Yeah.
And, I do think I think that's why it's so empowering. And just, again, being someone who loves people and celebrating others, it's very empowering. And so that's good advice, and I'll certainly take it under.
See what happens. Do it. See what happens in 6 months. See what happens in a year. How you feel, and go from there.
So I have a question for you. You guys have recently switched to the midweek, and I was curious what you've noticed. You've talked a lot about this over the last couple of months, and you spoke about it a little bit now about how it has, you've made a priority. You weren't, you didn't say this, but mailing it in, just showing up. I mean, you're putting in the research, you're putting in the time, and you are, creating the blog. It's also, very helpful for you to get your thoughts, from what I'm gathering. Walk me through the midweek. What is it serving? What is it doing? How is it doing? And how are people responding to it compared to, let's say, your normal 2-hour block?
I'd have to talk to Doug about the analytics of it. The last time we spoke, the numbers were about the same with the midweek and the standard podcast. From a numbers perspective, nothing has died off since the initial launch. One of the reasons was to be able to, so that I could devote a day of my week to the podcast and essentially get compensated for that. Because if I'm pulling off a job for the day, obviously I can't make less money. So if we're able to create another outlet for the podcast, other potential sponsors, and also for myself to be able to handle more ownership and be able to produce content on my own that benefits the podcast as a whole, it's easier for me to spend Tuesday doing the midweek, all the work and the prep for the podcast for the week, and record the normal podcast, than it is to show up to work for a half a day and then
that makes a lot of sense.
Jam in prepping. So I can't speak for the listener's opinion, but since we implemented this 3 months ago, I personally feel that the podcast as a whole has been a lot stronger, just because it's getting more time devoted to it.
It also coincided with your brand refresh, which is good timing.
Yeah, and I think that, I'll add to that, where I'm not doing a midweek. I hope to be able to prioritize that and add to it, because I had done an NS podcast for a long time, and it was just me direct to camera talk, riffing on one topic, very much like what Tyler's doing. And I've been wanting to do that again. And, back then it was just a totally different podcast. And this gives us the outlet, the opportunity to add to, the bigger brand, which is Modern Craftsman.
It's funny. I guess I could try one for fun, but I don't know if I have that skill set that you both
I think
do.
you could, because
Mark,
you can talk for like 10 minutes and just add something to,
but I think nobody wants to come off. I mean, I could just speak for myself. Like, I'm not a know-it-all. I don't think I am. And the last
Sure.
thing I think it's like an identity thing. Like, I think and I'm only speaking for myself because I certainly don't feel like, I'm guessing you don't feel like a know-it-all either, Tyler. And if you do, yeah, knucklebones, power to you. But like, but the point of it is like, I'm not sure I have that much to say to just, I mean, I obviously talk a lot, so that's not that I don't think I can talk. It's like, what is my point? And I feel like when I'm in a conversation, I feel like it's like tennis and, you're going back and forth. And so I feel like that's much more organic for me. But again, I've never tried it. I've never even, I mean, I could certainly do a few recorded ones and decide if I air them or not. It's just mainly just asking you how you came up with that or how you felt like that was.
Doug did initially because we were looking to create more content, and it's difficult to get Nick and myself and everyone together and a guest. So this was an easy way to create more content. And it a side benefit of this that I didn't realize is that I don't take a ton of time to get inside my own head and reflect on my thoughts or what's going on in my life on a daily or weekly basis. And it's somewhat been forced reflection that has been nice. So I'm actually sitting down for a couple hours a week and not other times that I unwind, it's a distraction, right? I ride my
Yeah.
dirt bike and I'm in a flow state and I'm getting out of my own mind and I'm taking a few hours a week to get inside my own mind or business, answer people's questions, or just reflect on how I'm feeling and communicate that to our listeners. So it's been really nice to think about what I'm feeling physically, mentally, emotionally. With everything I'm sure that family, life, business, podcasts, like it's go, go, go. And you don't always have the time to reflect. So it's been nice to be able to look within, engage what I'm doing, and reflect on what my life looks like. So it's been nice.
It's funny. I don't know if Nick, I'm guessing you can relate to this as well, because I think you and I personality wise have a few shared traits, especially with like the exercise thing. Like, when you're running, I listen to a lot of book tapes, but like if my batteries are dead or whatever, it ends up being one of the best runs I've had because it's like finally you stop putting input in your dumb brain and like and then all of a sudden these just ideas just come flooding out all the time.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be training for 50K to run up a mountain out in Montana where I grew up, or we had a camp in this fall. And I've already pre-warned my staff because I tend to get my best ideas when I'm exercising. And so, I'll often call, and I don't usually answer client calls, obviously, during this time because it sounds unprofessional, but I'll often call my staff with an idea and I'll just be like, hey, Keith, I need you. And it's like, they're just kind of like, where are you running out? And, anyway, I don't know. Is that what happens to you when you're training for your marathon or when you have time when you're running like that, or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think that, the marathon training just in general, like a general thought on that, is just very difficult for me right now. And I think
Well, you
it's
have a
just,
new baby.
well, and truthfully, it's not so much about the new baby. It's just that I think that I've bitten off not more than I can chew, but it just becomes like this priority thing where
Yeah.
this morning I thought to myself, I'm like, how is this helping me? Why am I running? Like, is it like I have so many other things that would be actually moving the needle. And I'm still out there training. It's one of those things for me. It's the hardest thing I'm doing right now, I guess is what I'm getting at, from a prioritization standpoint. Um, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Mark, I have to jump.
Yep.
Tyler can keep running. I got to pick up my daughter.
This is a 4-hour podcast, right?
It is a
Yeah.
4-hour. The last two are with Tyler.
Bring it on.
But dude, I appreciate you being on, and
It was awesome. Thank you. It was a real privilege, and yeah,
I will connect with you when I'm in Minnesota, and hopefully I can be sitting in front of that green
that'd be
screen.
awesome.
So we're gonna have to Nick has to roll. We're gonna have to get you back on, or I'll get you on a midweek. I still have more questions for you that I want to dig
Anytime.
into.
Doug has reached out. I think our original schedule was in July or June, and then every time you'd have a cancel, I get like a notice like 2 hours before. He's like, "Hey, can you be on?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh man, of course I wanted to be on." But this was perfect. So thank you, Doug. You're gonna listen at some point, whether you're now or in edit. But
Well,
anytime you want me
what I
on,
should also do is I should get your actual contact information because a lot of times, no respect, people do cancel, and we're looking for rather than Nick and myself just hop on another podcast guest would be great. But I have some more stuff that I do want to dig into you about. So I think that would work out well.
Be happy to do it. How do I get you the information, or you have mine?
I'll touch base email. I'll get your cell phone, all that
Have
stuff.
your people get a hold of my people.
Yeah, usually they do, which has been that's one of the nicest thing. Like when we were changing and evolving, we were able to put money aside to hire people to take care of all of the stuff that Nick and myself just didn't have time to do, which is why it all just
I had to text Nick
by the wayside.
I had to text Nick, obviously, to get your home address, to get that box to you, because I couldn't find any contact information for you.
Yeah.
Which obviously is by design. But anyway, I sort of enjoyed that challenge as well.
Yeah. No, but I appreciate your time. Nick had a hard stop, and I didn't realize what time it was. So I know it's no, you're only 4 o'clock.
I'm at 4:09. Right? I've got some time before to get the kiddos.
So we have an hour. But I appreciate your time. And is there anything before we hop off that you wanted to discuss, talk about, anything that I should have asked you that you really wanted to dive into?
Well, I mean, I think it was when we had discussed ahead of time a little bit, and only because Nick and I have talked a lot about it, but you and I haven't. And it seems like, I'm always interested in talking about time blocking and life planning, and how we talked about just high level. But yeah, anytime you guys want to talk more about that, I think that's obviously, considering how well your episodes did about that, it seems like people crave that as well. Your lifestyle routines. I'm always really fascinated by how people structure their day, and with little kids, and all that stuff does lead into the business. And I think that's always a topic that I'd be happy to discuss at more length. That's not a short topic by any means. I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I mean, other than maybe the tour homes, I think one thing that we really try to prioritize is making these tour events be an experience.
Yeah.
And so, I'm always trying new ideas.
I heard the saxophone idea on Brad's podcast.
Yeah. And actually, that's actually my brother-in-law. He plays in a band. He's an incredible athlete. He's an incredible musician. And so having him show up and wander the house is just unexpected. And so it's kind of it's like, whoa, this is different.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to maybe fall on its face, but I had a balloon. People have a weird relationship with clowns, evidently. I don't really care. But so he wasn't a clown, but he was a kid's balloon tire and face paint.
Yeah.
People loved that.
Oh, I'm sure.
They went nuts for it.
Kids love that.
But it wasn't even I had so many pictures of grown 65-year-old men walking around with a giant poodle on their head. And it's it reminds me of the scene from Wedding Crashers, make me a bike clown. It's Wrigley Field. And so it's so I love doing something that's sort of unexpected. And so our tour home coming up, I've kind of expanded my ideas, and so we'll see what hits and what doesn't hit. So I do want I think this is something where maybe my peer group, aka my wife and my team, can help me. I like to entertain because I like to be entertained. I like to enjoy what we're doing. So we do a really high end product, and I feel like sometimes my personality might disguise the fact that, and this is coming from my wife, who says this, she's this, I like to post I like to laugh. So I like to do fun stuff. I just did that. I don't know if you saw it. I had this concept to do Building Ain't Easy video. And did you see the one with me playing guitar? Do yourself, I'll DM it to you. I didn't want to be, but it's worth checking out. And I don't know where that fits in with my overall brand, because I feel like people, the way they interacted with it, they love it. The question is does my personality distract the higher end client or an architect from realizing he doesn't take anything serious, which I certainly can. That's kind of the whole difference that you nailed right on the spot. Hey, a one-on-one, I can get very serious and sober minded, and I like the deep I would much rather have these conversations, by the way, than ask 20 people, for a 2-minute conversation. The depth is just way more engaging. And so I wonder sometimes if my own personality, I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, it is what it is. I guess I can't change myself, but I don't know quite yet how to brand that, because left to my own devices, I would do probably even more dad jokes. But yet people always interact with those. And so how do you thread the needle of being approachable and have the levity and have entertainment, but yet also be by the way, you're extremely competent and you can do incredible high-end work. Balancing that sometimes is not the easiest for me.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's an answer to that, and I think you could ask 10 people and get 10 different answers. My thought has always been that when you're signing up for a job, you're marrying that customer for a fairly long time, and I want them to know who I truly am.
Yep.
And if this is who you enjoy being, and this is the person that makes you happy and who you truly are, I don't know if I would cloak that in some sort of facade that's this reserved professional suit,
I couldn't even do that if I tried, but I hear what you're
but like
saying.
if people are going to hire you for your product and for you.
Hmm.
So if that customer doesn't like you, I don't know if
And
you
that's
want to be
okay.
in bed with them for 2 years,
Right. Yep.
and if that prevents you from getting the customer base that you want, then maybe you have to take that into consideration, but
Mhm.
maybe cross that bridge when you come to it. If you have to change who you are to get the customer base that you are,
Yeah.
maybe you
Then
don't really want that customer
no,
base,
100. Yeah. That
you know?
See, you should really, if you're not making money to be a podcast, you could definitely make a money being a therapist.
Oh, I'm so screwed up though. It's easy to help other people, but I can't implement this shit myself.
Well, it's yeah, it's funny you say that. It's like when you respond to people on your podcast, like when I have other guests on, you oh, do this, do that, and then you think like, well, man, have I done that? Like
Yeah.
business plans, right? Like, oh yeah, I should really do that, or anyway, it is funny how often you know what the right answer is, but it always comes back to time, prioritization, and can you create a system to kind of help you achieve that?
Yeah, do as I say, not as I do. That's the expression.
I heard a great quote about that. It was about I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. And then the other quote was I'm gonna butcher it, but basically I can't say it, but basically it was something like along the lines of you be an example, and when mandatory, speak. The
Yeah,
idea was like let your life, of course, be the example.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mark,
Or
I appreciate you getting on. Where can any listener find you? Where's the
You can
best
find us,
place?
Instagram or LinkedIn at Mark Williams or Mark D. Williams CustomHomes.com. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, kind of anywhere in the metro area. And then the Curious Builder podcast. It's securitybuilderpodcast.com or again on Instagram as well. And so, feel free to DM us if you want to be a guest, if you're interested in sponsoring the show. So, we don't go into financial ruin, or we can go weekly. If you want more of the Curious Builder,
Yeah,
if you want more
yeah.
dad
Go
jokes,
weekly. Go
let's go
weekly.
weekly. I do want to go weekly really bad. You're kind of a dangerous friend, Tyler.
Yeah. I mean, if you enjoy it,
I
I
do.
say
I don't
figure
enjoy it.
out
I
a way.
love it.
Yeah,
It
figure out
gives
a
me
way to make
wings.
it happen.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Red Bull gives me wings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you guys if you haven't checked out the podcast, check out the podcast. It's on all I checked it out. It's on all the major
It is. Yep.
platforms,
Yep.
podcast platforms. So you can definitely find it. But if
On
not, you can check
YouTube, I
out.
think we have the YouTube channel is Mark Williams Custom Homes. We're posting all our videos there. It has a slower traction there, and but really it's about the quality of the guests, and the audio is outstanding. So the other thing too is I speak really fast, so it's hard to actually listen to mine at 1.5. It's
Half
funny.
speed.
I do. I can listen to yours at like 1.5 or 1.7, and so I can the 2 hours. It's funny because when I originally saw your episodes being 2 hours, I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. And now I love what you said about it. You said that it takes an hour to really get into a guest, and then the other hour is the real deep dive. And I
Yeah.
do appreciate that about your episodes. It's
Yeah,
fun.
everyone has to warm up. There's a bit of a courting process for everyone to get comfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate the support, and if we can do anything to help with the podcast, obviously let us know. Congrats on the Rebrand. The website looks dope. I checked it out.
Thanks, buddy. I'll
You did a
send you.
good
I'll
job.
send you that music video, because the next time we're on, we could talk a little bit about social media strategy. Because I'll wait till you see that video and we can chat. And then actually, before I let you go, because I want to have you on at some point if you end up coming with Nick here to Minnesota. But one thing I love the fact that you guys. I love the idea of co-hosts. I've actually thought about on our podcast about having a guest host every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I haven't explored that yet. And I was going to do it on a live event, but it's my first live event. I'm like, I should probably just know what I know and deal with that. But I'm actually very intrigued about bringing on different guests. I just think it'd be different hosts to help us
Yeah,
guess, different perspective.
we've considered that as well. Having, I think that it's a good idea, and having the same guest, obviously the same co-host multiple times, and I think it'll take you guys a bit to get into a rhythm. But I think that would be easier to do than having a full-time co-host, just as far as
Mhm.
managing schedules go.
I already know who I want. I mean, I for sure want a female. I mean, there's so many talented women in building and around me specifically, and I have so many great relationships with them that, I want that. I feel like the women that I work with have such a better viewpoint. I mean, look at my wife. I've referred to her so many times in this podcast.
You just have a different perspective.
They do, and it's so much more insightful in a different way. I just feel like if I'm really, to your point, if I'm really honoring the podcast and the viewpoint and telling the story, I feel like another lens, another viewpoint is really helpful to really truly extract everything that is possible out of that guest.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Most of my life and the conversations that I had, I wound up well that I have 2 daughters, but I generally get along better with women. They like to have a little bit of a deeper conversation than I'm not like a guy's guy going out to the bars watching sports and shit like that. But yeah, I think that would be really cool for you.
Speaking of, every time you open your mouth, I'm thinking of a new topic. This is going to go for 4 hours for sure. But you had mentioned something the other day on your podcast, and it's actually a business development idea that we're developing because I don't have any more time. I don't know why I'm doing this, but you had mentioned, being out in nature, and I even thought there's so many builders that I think there's a lot of stereotypes of what a builder may be, but all the builders I know are not like that. So I don't know where the stereotype comes from. This beer drinking, hammer swinging, beer belly guy.
It's the subs.
Yeah, that could be. Maybe that's it. But like when at the Contractor Coalition, we're up at 5:30 running the beach. There's guys slinging metal in the gym. It's like, okay, there's people way more interested in working out than I'm around here that I know of. And so the idea was to create like a vacation or like a networking destination where it's not so much about like the Contractor Coalition which is fine. It's an amazing event. That's not what I'm getting at, but it's like basically like a 2-day, 48-hour, 72-hour, like almost like an athletic escape, heli skiing, weightlifting, running. Like, I don't know what it's going to become, but something really like that. I think there'd be a lot of people that want to do it.
It'd be so sick.
So anyway.
I'd be more interested in that than the Contractor Coalition, and I certainly wouldn't sit up front at that.
Oh yeah. Well, I do have to go. They're shutting this place down on me as well. So let me know. I'm happy to jump on any single time. Send me a deal. I'll DM you that video. And thanks again for having me on. It was a real pleasure.
All right, perfect. Have a good one. Appreciate it.
All right. See you, Tyler.
See ya.